Okay, you are all set.
Okay, City of Philomath Planning Commission meeting. Call to order. Can we have a roll call?
Gianna Bernardini. Here. Haley Green.
Here.
Van Hunsaker.
Here.
Darlene Rose.
Here.
Joseph Sullivan.
Here.
Peggy Yoder.
Here.
Gary Connor.
Here.
Ruth Causey.
Here.
And also present is Chris Workman and myself, Ruth Post.
The first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from our April 18th meeting. And our new format is that they are fairly short bullets of topic being discussed and decisions made and the details on the recording. So are there any comments to these minutes?
I have a comment. To me, they're a little too truncated for a 2.5 hour meeting, and not a real easy read if somebody maybe wants to read it in 6, 7, 8 a year, because it doesn't really say anything. There's nobody mentioned what was said, no conversations, just like you said, bullet points. I found it, maybe it's just because I'm not used to it, but it just seems to be so brief. And to have it only, I asked how long the video would be online at the last meeting that I was in, and with Chelsea, and she said it, it'd be online for a year. That means if somebody's going to read some of these minutes in 2 years, how could they have any?
However, we do have the closed captioning from these minutes, which provides additional details. So I didn't get a chance to actually tell you all that this is,
Okay.
These are action minutes, and this is what the city council has requested that all of our committee meetings go to, is action minutes, which are more dedicated towards decisions made, the votes that happened, and who voted for what. They are meant to be more truncated, but we are also retaining the closed captioning from these meetings as part of our record.
Well, of like a permanent record?
Yes.
Oh, I see. I didn't know that. Thank you.
How does one find that?
And the closed captioning is also being posted on the website. It'll be there for a year, but the actual document will be retained.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I have 2 amendments to the minutes. I have basically 2 things from the last meeting that I was kind of hoping to accomplish. And the 2 comments I had were the city should offer some kind of tax incentive specifically tied to job creation. And the second one was we needed some way to give our city government the tools or processes required to feel comfortable placing certain key points in writing to inquiring businesses as kind of part of the economic incentive. It's really hard for a business to come to Philomath if they can't get questions answered in writing, because that's the only thing banks accept. So I'd like to amend the minutes to include those 2 points. So that's pretty much my only contribution to the meeting last time.
And where?
Anywhere in the economics, so at that first page, B1 discussion, anywhere in that discussion, I'd like to insert the words, Mr. Sullivan or Commissioner Sullivan suggested the city offer some kind of tax incentive specifically tied to job creation of incoming businesses, period. For example, $1,000 per year per FTE for the first 5 years. And I can
Think bullet point.
send this to you.
Yes.
Yeah,
please
this is
send it
the-
to me,
I
and
cut this down.
I will insert it as a bullet point.
Awesome. And then the second one is, it is hard for businesses to come to Philomath. Commissioner Saho, you want to say that? Commissioner Sullivan stated that it is hard for businesses to come to Philomath because the only way to know what things will be approved or how much the feasible total is to actually do it. We need to give our city government the tools or processes required to feel comfortable placing certain key points in writing to inquiring businesses.
And I think, Joseph, if you look on page 2, under the discussion on attachment A, the 4th bullet point down lists discussion of challenges for developers seeking specific answers to questions to base business decisions on, and removing obstacles and streamlining processes to allow for economic development were 2 bullet points that were developed around those comments.
Yeah, and those are good. I mean, they came from Eco Northwest and they're in line with what they were saying. But I don't feel that those.
Well, that was during the discussion of that, but those were based on your discussion comments.
Okay, well, I'm not really talking about the contents of the document right now. We haven't really gotten into that. I'm just saying that I'd like the minutes to reflect my 2 statements from the previous meeting.
Right, I guess what we're saying is with action minutes, they're not gonna reflect, he said this, she said that. It's really about bullet points of discussion topics that were had, and then the vote that was taken. So when you go to action minutes, there's a lot less narrative and a lot more just this was the overall discussion, this was the decision that was made. And then if you want that level of detail, then we're providing the audio and the video and the closed caption of the entire meeting to provide, but we're not going to capture that level of detail in action minutes.
Okay, so it's really important that the permanent record of our meetings reflect the character and specifically the actions taken during the meeting. If you guys would prefer to record these as action minutes, I'm sure that I can make that happen. I move that the minutes be amended to reflect my statements that the city should offer some kind of tax incentive specifically tied to job creation of incoming businesses. For example, $1,000 per year per FTE for the first 5 years. And also, it is hard for businesses to come to Plymouth because the only way they know what things will be approved or how much the feasible total is to actually do it. We need to give our city government the tools or processes required to feel comfortable placing certain key points in writing to inquiring businesses. That's my motion.
Was that a second or a question?
No, that
Well, she
was a
can't
question.
second. She's not on the planning commission.
Oh, I second it.
So discussion.
I think we did explain that that level of detail isn't how the council expects this document or the minutes or the action minutes to be done. So I'll vote no on that.
So
So-
does that mean that from now on, everything that is said, it needs to be said in a motion if you want it to be in here? Because it'll pick up a motion, right? It won't pick up, it'll pick up a vote.
Correct.
Okay, so, and will it pick up the wording of the vote?
Yes, word for word.
Okay.
Motions are word for word.
Which is why I said it in motion, because honestly, whether or not we actually do these 2 things is less important to me than the fact that it was said. And if the council wants us to do things as action minutes, that's fine. I'm not someone to go up against the council, but that just means that I have to say this in motion, and I'm happy to do that.
So my piece of the discussion is that I disagree with you. I don't know that exactly getting everything in the minutes is super critical. What's super critical is that we get things into the comprehensive plan, and then we get them into, action in the city through zoning changes and all those sorts of things. So I think recording every little bit of discussion in the minutes doesn't really serve a huge purpose. It's more like these are the things, these are the topics. People aren't going back to those years later, but the comprehensive plan is going to be in place for however long it's there. So it's really about the votes that we take and the specific words we get into the documents more than recording our conversation during our meeting.
I agree with you. The reason this matters so much to me is because it's really hard for me to remember exactly what happened, weeks or months ago. And the only reference I have, and really the only thing I can use to discuss with you guys, is what's written in the minutes. And so if something that's important or that I want to reference later doesn't appear in the minutes, it's virtually impossible for me to say, hey, remember that thing? Because we'll all look to the minutes and say, well, I don't really see a record of that. Realistically, are we going to go to the closed captions and dig through them? Probably not, unless it's some giant point.
I was gonna say to that, actually, now on the YouTube recordings, somebody has noted when different discussions, points are up for discussion, which is tremendously helpful, because a lot of times when I'm going to a city meeting in another group, and I'm looking to find out what happened around a certain thing, before I was like scrolling through 4 hours of meeting and it was just interminable, and now it's so nice to be able to be like, when did they talk about the economic development, and go right to it. I mean, it's bookmarked or whatever in the, right there, if you go to the meeting.
So I think last month's packet included insert that Ruth had prepared that talked about action minutes and the moved action minutes. And so, maybe we need to go back through that and have that discussion more, because there are trade-offs. There's pros and cons, right? I mean, we don't have unlimited staff time for everything. We've tried to put our emphasis on things that are most requested and we feel are most helpful, and then we're shying away. That means we have to spend less time doing things that we feel are less helpful and less reviewed and less looked at. So there's pros and cons to it, but maybe that's a discussion we can bring back to you in the future and have that discussion. But the city council has had the discussion, and they have said that these are what we want for our meetings going forward. It just, again, I get where Commissioner Sullivan's coming from. It's just, it's a different set of minutes, and it's a different frame of mind on what you're looking for. So you are gonna have to look at different places other than the minutes for specifics on conversations that were had.
To be honest, I think I prefer the recording, going to the recording itself to find these details, because the minutes, even before, you were beholden to the person writing the minutes to add, to capture exactly what was said, and that is difficult to do, and I felt like didn't always successfully happen. So these are shorter, but I actually like that. I feel like this is as much information as I need about what our last meeting was, and if there's an area here that I want more detail about, because they are so broad as to be almost useless, then I know where to go, and I can hear that exact section.
Yeah.
Councillor Causey, did you have something that you wanted to add?
I was just going to suggest that those two examples could be included as sub-bullets, but that's your
As sub-bullets.
yeah, and the 2 bullets that the city recorder referred to. For example.
I'm kind of on board with Gianna. I think I really liked this layout, because then I could go back in and look at, what statements we were talking about. And I was like, okay, yeah, I see what's going on there. And so it seemed effective to me. I understand your perspective, but I did like it this way.
In this particular case, this was something that I cared about that you might not care about, or maybe the commission doesn't care about. And I totally understand that if it's not something you guys care about, you probably don't care that it's in the notes. And I understand that. For me personally, and I think for all of you guys, if you come to a meeting and there's one thing you care about, like you're gonna leave one little ding in that meeting that's your contribution, right, for 2.5 hours, it'd be nice to see that contribution recorded somewhere that's official record of the meeting. Now, if I'm all for brevity, I tell people at work all the time, if it has to be long, if no one's gonna read it, right? Brevity and simplicity is just the name of the game. But if we can't include one thing that each one of us cares about from the meeting in the minutes, I don't even have the minutes. At any rate, it doesn't matter if you guys vote down my motion. Making the motion puts those words verbatim in the minutes, which is all I cared about anyway.
Right.
So I'll take exception to what you said, because if I bring something important, I care how it influences our work products and our votes. And if there's a flag that I'm carrying on some particular issue, I'm going to bring it up at the next meeting, whichever meeting is appropriate in the future and whenever the time is appropriate in the future. And so I personally don't think the level of specificity of the issues is important in the minutes. I think what's important in the minutes is the topics discussed and the final results of our meeting.
Do you feel like we have the topics discussed? Because what we mostly
do.
have is
I do.
a list of numbers and changes. It doesn't really say,
Well, I believe those two bullets, like Ruth brought up, in kind of give the topic of your statements, but.
I understand that, but I guess my whole point is,
So-
I don't feel like they do, and that's why I'm trying to put it in the minutes.
Well, then I feel like it would be appropriate to make an amendment to the minutes that would add a topic to be discussed, that if that was missed, but not, a 2-sentence word for word description of what was proposed, unless it was in fact a motion. Yes,
I just wanted to point out that I think what Joseph has requested illustrates the problems with the minutes that we were having because they never met everyone's needs.
Mhm.
And I would ask the city recorder how long you spent prior to the format change on a typical set of minutes.
A 2-hour meeting would take approximately 6 hours to do the minutes.
Okay, so that's,
And one of the benefits of doing the minutes in an action format is it provides that additional staff ability to do the linking on the YouTube video that Gianna mentioned, so that the public can go directly to, or anybody can go directly to a section of the minutes that the meeting that they wanted to go back and watch. So that is one of the values of that time savings by doing action minutes. One of the other important things that I feel about action minutes is it, and Gianna also touched on this, is it removes biases. It removes the bias of the writer of the minutes to potentially not frame somebody in the vision that of what they thought they said.
Ruth, I'm on board. I think action minutes are wonderful, and it's going to drive me, I think, healthily to make more motions, and that way we'll have more, actual concrete things we can write on, because the only way this body conducts business is with motions. It's not with chit chat. So I think recording only the motions and the votes on them is a very healthy step, and I have nothing against that. I want you guys to understand that.
So you're gonna be voting no on your motion?
No, I'm still be voting for it. I still believe in it.
Well, it's captured.
But,
But if you vote no, then you have both, right?
all right, I think we're ready to vote. All in favor of the motion? Aye. Opposed? Okay. So the motion fails 4-2.
and yet it secretly succeeded.
Opposed? We all have our own agendas, don't we?
Will it capture the votes?
Yes.
Before we vote to approve them, I do have something else that I was wondering on this one. The bullets don't have a number, but when you read down about midway, it says number 11 directed specifically at Mill Pond Industrial Park Development.
First page,
Pardon me?
first page,
Yes.
okay.
Sorry. I wrote down that it should be 10, because I think the 11 just doesn't seem to fit in. See where it says 11 directed specifically at Mill Pond Industrial Park Development.
I believe you may be correct about that.
Pardon me?
I think you may be correct about that.
Okay.
That maybe should be 10.
Okay.
I'd have to go back and look, but would you like me to double check on that and bring these minutes back to your next meeting?
We can check real quick. Van's got it there. Let's go ahead and read off number 10 of the current policies.
Area designated for industrial development are also appropriate for low-intensity commercial
So that should
uses,
be a 10.
offices, warehousing, and other similar.
And then just to double check, what's number 11?
The orderly development of frontage along Highway 2034 between 19th and the eastern urban growth boundary,
So. I think it
particularly
should-
the north shore of the road.
Yeah, so it should be 11, right?
I think 11 is correct.
So
And it does mention the old Willamette.
how did it pick it up in error?
No, it is correct. It is number
So-
11.
It is a number 11 when they're talking about 19th Street and East?
Well,
No,
it was along
this is-
Highway 2034.
This is Mill Pond Industrial Park, not Mill Pond
Oh, that's right.
Development.
Oh, okay. Okay. I
Oh.
apologize. That is my confusion.
Mhm.
Okay.
So, we'll leave it.
Yeah, I think it's correct.
Well, that makes me feel better about these truncated minutes then.
Oh, and I guess I wasn't gonna say, that was one I wasn't gonna say something about. By the way, I'm sorry I wasn't here, but that particular 11 had to do with the whole thing, not, this does say Mill Pond Industrial Park.
Yeah.
It was the whole thing, and the whole idea was to reduce the number of entrances onto the highway.
And we did discuss that. That was
Okay.
just kind of the brief way of saying where we were talking about.
Good.
That wasn't so descriptive for many people.
Didn't we used to call that Clemens Mill?
Yeah. That's what it was.
Okay.
Okay, all in favor of the minutes as presented?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? One opposed. Passes. Comprehensive plan. Economic development. Mr. Workman, do you have anything to say to introduce your?
Yeah, chapter
Summary?
2, economy. Again, feel like we was able to, I had good notes to go from. I did go back and listen to the meeting a second time, just to make sure I'd captured everything. A little bit of playing around with the introduction, because we hadn't really talked about that a whole lot. And didn't have a lot of conversation about what you liked or didn't like in other cities' introductions. And so I kind of looked at what we did for the housing and incorporated that. So there's some language from Eco Northwest and some of it kind of what we heard, and then some of it's just summarizing the state's requirements and reviewing those briefly. So I kind of went out on a limb on the overview and the context portion of that. And then again, trying to pull the rest into 4 goals. Didn't really like how goal 4 only has one policy, but that wasn't that dissimilar to some of the others that we looked at, where it's kind of its own part on workforce development, and we didn't really discuss that out. That was kind of at the end of the meeting, and I think we were kind of done talking about it. So if there's additional feedback there, we can do that. But again, it wasn't uncommon from what I saw in others. Other cities, examples that we took a look at. So this is really a chance to go through it and talk through it. I mean, we're not married to any of this, but I did try to capture majority of the comments that we've heard. Tried to capture all the comments that we heard. I've got a few things that I could recommend as we get through them, things that maybe we could pull out that it was either language that was left in that we're like, yeah, this is okay, but then once you get it on there, it's like, well, maybe not necessary. Now that you have these other policies built out around it, it seems kind of unnecessary or duplicative. But yeah, I'm really open to the best way that the commission wants to go through these. I'm happy to answer questions and get additional feedback. Time frame wise, I think I put in the memo, we'd be looking to, again, we've got that 30-day window that we've got to give DLCD notice that we're going to have this first hearing. And so, if we get to a point where you're comfortable tonight with the feedback you give me, making those corrections, we can give notice to DLCD and then we can have that hearing, at least that 30 days out. I think I've got that on the calendar. I guess while we're on that topic, we can go there real quick. We'd be looking at the housing chapter. I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but just so we know where we're at, the housing chapter public hearing has been noticed for May 16th already. And so these would come back for the economy chapter would be June 7th. If there's some consensus tonight on moving forward. If there's enough changes and not a comfort level with this draft version where it's at now, we would just bump that out a little bit more time depending on when your next meeting would be and go from there. So the goal for tonight would be to get the commission to comfort level with these with specific revisions, pretty specific language that I could go ahead and draft up and prepare for the public hearing. again, I'll just remind, even after the public hearing, there's opportunity for deliberation. The way that the schedule is now, it'll be a public hearing and all the rest of the time is deliberation, right? So we've got a lot of time to go back in and massage specific language before we make a recommendation to the city council. So it's not a last shot at these, but we want it to be, this is what essentially, what we end on tonight will essentially be what we want to go out to the public for the public hearing. So
Should we discuss the schedule then first?
That's not our agenda.
Okay. Well, he brought it up.
Well, but
So-
that's the context for what we're doing here, so it should inform how our discussion goes tonight. You know, we don't need to reach total consensus and perfection. We're just trying to get the draft document in front of the public to have the public hearing,
Whatever it is.
whenever it is. And I would like to propose how we approach this tonight and hear anybody else's idea, but I was thinking that we could start so that we don't lose it with anything that anybody feels like is completely missing from here. Kind of overview, and then go through just discussion piece by piece. Does anybody have a different proposal for how we approach discussing this?
I do.
Yeah.
So when we approved, I forget which documents they were, it was last year sometime, we had a motion to approve and present to the public. And then before we voted on that, we had motions to amend, and we amended specific points, and then when we were done, we voted on it. It seemed like that worked really, really well. Would that be okay in this case? Do you have any objections to that?
No, I think that's appropriate this time. You know, last time when we were just totally amorphous, that would have been unworkable.
Yes, I
But
totally,
I
I
think
completely
we're
agree.
close enough now that we can absolutely do it that way.
I so move. I move that we approve this draft chapter for presentation at a public hearing.
Is there a second?
A second.
Okay. Discussion.
So,
So is there anything incredibly missing from this document? Unless somebody else feels like they really need to get something else out of the way first.
I
Yes.
personally don't have an overview. I just have my comments for discussion on the pages. So for me to say, oh yeah, let's just approve this
Well,
and
we didn't-
I-
We're
didn't
not,
say
that.
we're not.
approve this and then make amendments.
No,
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 no.
Now we're making
that
our.
motion's on the table. We're gonna vote on that motion after we're all done.
yeah, so right now, we're just making motions to amend the motion. So if you go through the things you've got, say, I make a motion to amend the motion, then we can discuss it, yes or no, vote on it, and then you can move on to your next thing. That way we just tick off everything in line. And
Okay,
then once we got through all the bullet points, we're all happy. Before we go home, the last thing we do is to vote on this motion, which is right now on the table.
okay,
That we made all
Thank
the
you.
amendments to.
And
Otherwise, we'd be just rushing through it all.
I appreciate,
right.
Yeah.
and I appreciate that too, because I think that will help us go through quicker, because sometimes we end up discussing something that we all agree on for a while.
Yeah.
So if we just kind of clip through, sometimes that helps.
Okay, to answer your question,
What's missing?
I wasn't here, but I wanted to throw this out. And this is number 4. It says compatibility of the current, compatibility between future land uses surrounding designated industrial areas and existing and future industrial uses shall be attained through the use of setbacks, vegetative screening requirements, and tiered zoning. Tiered zoning is the word I'm looking at, particularly techniques which would isolate low-density residential uses from heavy industrial uses. Now, I say that, I know we made changes to our industrial code, and it talked about setbacks and vegetative screening and stuff like that. But this part about tiered zoning, and I don't know that we need it, but I guess I felt like it's a question to ask, in that right now, the mill, okay, now there is some other industrial property in front of it, but if it was heavy industrial on the other side of the railroad, that wouldn't be good for the people that live on this side of the railroad. So I guess kind of accommodating that sort of situation, maybe it's worth saying something about.
So I tried to capture that in policy 2.2. And again, it's maybe a simplified version, and so if we need to tweak it, we can, but it's towards the end. I said, and the orderly development of highway frontage outside the downtown area with consolidated accesses, commingled signage, and appropriate levels of landscaping and buffering. So it doesn't talk specifically to the zoning, but really we've only got heavy industrial and light industrial, so it's tiered, but there's only 2 tiers. So I didn't address specific the distinction between the zoning, and really the conversation, if I recall, was really more about having some buffering, especially between the highway and that use, have the landscaping and the buffer and the setbacks and stuff. But it doesn't, to your point, it doesn't really address separation from one heavy industrial use to light industrial use. That's not really captured in here.
And I know it's not like we have a lot of different ones, like you said, so maybe it isn't needed, but it just came to mind.
I think that would be a good place to put a little more about the intent of graduating uses for that purpose.
Oh, within that number too.
Yeah, I think we could add a little bit of words there to beef that up a little bit on the intent. It's not a specific rule, it's just our intent.
Saying tiered zoning techniques.
Yeah.
So if I made
I guess I would suggest that you make that motion when we get there.
On that point, okay, I got you.
Yeah, because at that point, my brain will be better wrapped around.
Yeah, in the order of
in
things.
the order of things.
Okay.
Commissioner Yoder.
I just have a basic question about the whole thing, and that is, when I showed this to somebody to read, and the comment was, I feel like I'm missing something because there's no action items. And so if we take this document to the public without action items, will the public have a chance to comment on our action items, or is it something that we're just going to add to the policies without the actions? Like the one from Echo Northwest, which my dog literally ate my homework.
The bite marks.
Has action items, the one that's supplied by the Echo Northwest. But we've pretty much stuck with the policies. There are some action items in here, which we can talk about as we reach it. But I was just wondering, will the public ever have the opportunity to see the action items that are going to be associated with this chapter? Do you understand?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I followed the pattern that we did with the communications chapter, chapter 1, community involvement chapter 3 with housing, where we didn't include action items. We just went with the goals and the policies. The action items, although useful, really are going to fold in. The first place that the public is really going to see those is when they get into like the strategic plan, where the city council looks at these policies and says, which of these are most important, which things are we going to focus on, and then creates an action item within the strategic plan, or maybe an objective within the strategic plan to, address some of these comprehensive plan priorities or policies. But, we obviously can't do all of this at once, right? The city council is going to have to make a determination on which things are of most priority and focus on those. So that's when they would turn into action items. But this level, we're really just talking about what policies do we want to have in the comprehensive plan.
Yeah, and for me, it's always a debate how specific you get at each level. And this is a comprehensive plan. And the more specific you get, the more dated it can get quickly. So a specific action item might not be relevant in 4 years because the agency we talk about no longer exists or whatever it is. And that the comprehensive plan, to me, should be this higher level document. Furthermore, we're tasked with rewriting the comprehensive plan in a short order of time, and we're going to struggle to get it done in a year. So I think the action items are just that next level and probably even more contentious than what do we want to accomplish, right?
But I guess I just don't think that, if we're not gonna let the public have input to the action items, I definitely disagree with that. But I do understand the expediency, but we seem to be operating under that pressure
Well,
quite a bit.
the public always has input in everything the city does. It's just the action items. This document is not about action items. It's about what do we want to accomplish. Let's talk about that first.
Kind of what's the end goal?
What's the end goal? That's what the comprehensive plan's about. And
Okay, well, that was a question. They're not gonna have
specifics
input on this one. They're not gonna have the input. They're not gonna have the input on this one, because there's no action items.
Well,
They'll
the
have
cities,
input on
the
this.
document, the citizens are gonna have input on this document on
Right.
what we want to accomplish.
Without action items.
Yeah, because we're not gonna talk about how we're gonna accomplish it yet.
Yeah.
That's
And-
next.
And I guess Peggy, to go off on that would be some action items might be things that get put into the code, in the development code. And, when we change the development code, there would be public hearings about that. And so, I mean, that's just one example and then as he mentioned, the strategic plan, there would be those opportunities for input.
You recall the last meeting, I brought up the question, are there specific action items in what we're looking at that need to be rolled into the policies? And we talked about those, and there's a few examples where the feedback was, yes, this action item, it's specific, but it's good rolled into the policy. And so I couldn't name them off the top of my head, but as we go through these, I might be able to recognize some areas where, if you look at the Eco Northwest document, it is an action item, but we rolled it up into the policy and captured the gist of it there. So we did talk about that a little bit the last meeting.
I have just a little correction. I think commingled on line 94 needs 2 M's.
Where at?
Line 94.
Oh,
While we're at it, could someone define that for me? What is commingled signage?
This and that.
Like grouped together, commingled, pulled together into one. Rather than having every business have their own sign, you would commingle them, pull them all together.
Like at the shopping center.
Oh, right, gotcha, thank you. I was like, what?
I was gonna say, this is a public meeting, we can't define that on camera.
I did have,
I'm open to a different term if there's a different word.
No,
that
no,
expresses
you
that
all
better,
knew
but-
what it was, so.
Interestingly, on the spelling of that, it accepts it both ways.
Does it?
Yeah.
Because I looked at it and I thought,
Maybe
looks like
one's
it
the
has 2
British
M's. So I
version,
Googled
one's
it
the
and
English.
came up
I
with 2
don't know.
M's. But either way works for me.
Are we on section 2? Like, are we going through linearly, or are we just?
No, we're on the total document,
Back.
and then
Sorry.
then I'm ready to talk about the overview.
on item 17, again from the old one, and the number 17 in the minutes, it says off-street parking in downtown areas compared to development outside of town. Here, 17 says the city shall require any new commercial development to provide sufficient off-street parking and improvements or a covenant consenting to participate in the improvements of adjoining substandard streets. I didn't see anything in here about that. And I don't know if your discussion said, oh, we don't need that, or because maybe in the development code, again, it's already there. And so it's more of a question than I feel like it has to be there. Did you see anything like that with Chris?
I believe I remember that we did discuss that to some degree. And
It's like,
a lot of the changes that are coming in the latest downtown development issues is not to require every business to have off-street parking. Because,
okay,
that means.
okay. Well, no, that makes sense then, okay.
Would that be on policy 1.5?
It's somewhere we address public parking.
Managed
right?
parking in the
parking was
downtown area.
Oh, managed parking.
There we are,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah, probably.
Yeah, it's under kind of land supply. And it was in the development section, but I felt like it fit good under land supply because it was really more about setting the table.
Yeah.
And I felt like parking
Okay.
kind of fit in that table setting.
Okay, that was the only two that I,
Okay.
as far as adding, I'm okay with kind of
Yeah.
where it's
Okay.
at otherwise.
Commissioner Yoder?
Line 38, under context, is lack of infrastructure. So it's line 38. The such as sewer infrastructure in the northern part of town, that came from the action item 2.1A. But it's pretty specific. So if we're not going to have action items, then I would move to strike that parentheses.
Well, let's discuss that when we get to that section.
Where are we at then? If we're already,
We were talking about things that are missing from the document, because when
Okay.
you go through section by section by section, a lot of times you only look at what's in front of you rather than say, okay, this is the document. What is not here? What needs to appear that should be here? Should we be saying something about economic development that this doesn't say yet, as opposed to, do we agree with how this says it? Right. And then I was going to start with the overview and then just go through.
Maybe we can come back to that question after we've
Yeah,
gone through
we
everything. and
absolutely
Come back
can
and
come
address
back
that question
to it.
again. That might be.
Commissioner Sullivan.
Yeah, I move that we amend the motion to add, by adding policy section 3.6, support tax incentives specifically tied to job creation.
No, that's a good motion.
I tried.
Is there a second?
Could
Commissioner
you,
Bernadette seconded.
could you repeat that?
Yeah, support tax incentives specifically tied to job creation. I'm open to different wordings, it just seemed like the most generic way to say it.
Yeah. Discussion. I like it.
My thinking is that when businesses look at where they're going to move to, we want to capture the businesses that are going to create jobs. And the rest of them can find wherever they want to move to.
If they just pay lots of taxes, that might work too.
So is, just looking at 3.3, and again, it may not be specific enough, so this may be one, but read through 3.3 and the bottom of 3.3, I think is where we tried to capture that, but again, it's not nearly as specific.
Yeah, the 3.3 does come pretty close, and it's got some really great tools in there. There might be some tools that we haven't considered or might not consider until some point in the future. And if we had a policy that broadly supported tax incentives for job creating businesses, it could support that in the future. Whereas if it didn't specifically become a discount deferral development fee, or one of those.
Well, would it be even good to just say that and take that last sentence and then a half out, or to be more broad?
I kind of like separating them out because, the first one is really about, making it easier and development and that kind of thing. And these are all short-term things, and tax incentives can be short-term, but they can also be very long-term. And it's a little bit of a hot button issue, and it's something that can be critical important to really encouraging businesses. So I think it's worth making it its own policy just so it
do
gets
you have
the
a
attention.
number of what job creating means?
I feel like the more
percentage or-
specific we get, the more we're gonna make it difficult to find something we all agree on. But if we can keep it fairly generic, if we all agree that we want to have job creating businesses and incentivize that, then the exact implementation details we can work out.
Councilor Causey.
I just wanted to ask if the city manager could briefly explain the enterprise zone, because I think that's also a tax incentive, is that correct?
Yeah, the enterprise zone is a tax incentive that's tied to job creation. It's a tax incentive that's given to businesses that, so essentially any of your property tax or property, and then either real property or equipment is included in that as well. You can have a 3-year and up to 5-year no tax or tax-free if you meet standards, and they're mostly tied to job creation and retention of those jobs. The 3 years is kind of given, and then after year 3, they look at that job creation, and then the year 4 and year 5 are subject to that job creation being fulfilled. So But just reading this, you wouldn't necessarily know that, right? So, but that is what the enterprise zone is doing, is giving an incentive based on that job creation.
So this motion would continue to support for that, but without tying us to it, per se.
When I hear zone, I think of a specific area, but you're talking about just a business, no matter where they wind up.
Just a general policy, like
Okay.
what Chris explained with the enterprise zone, that sounds like exactly the kind of thing this would support. But if 2 years from now we said, oh, we don't actually want an enterprise zone, or the zone is too complicated or too small or something like that, we wouldn't be locked into just that one way of supporting incoming jobs.
But I guess I would just say, I'm just throwing this idea out there. We could replace enterprise zone with tax, tax incentives, tied to job creations instead of enterprise zone, or we could include that, comma, enterprise zones, comma, and kind of list it there. But again, that kind of rolls it back into all these other incentives, and it doesn't necessarily call it out specifically. So I don't want to minimize what you're trying to do. I'm just, if it's similar to these other incentives and we just want to list it more specifically as an incentive, we can do it within 3.3, or we could have, if we're gonna have it separate, I'd say we just do it right afterwards and have like 3.4 to specifically call out, we want it to be tied to it, which I guess just looking at it neutrally, I think it's pretty similar to these other incentives that we're giving, unless we feel like that's a more important incentive that we want to have its own policy around.
Personally, I like the way, now that, I thought that was a good idea, but now that I look at 3.3 more, I feel like that's it's very vague and large, but that's what all this is vague and large. I feel like that concept is adequately captured within 3.3. Very broadly. But I feel like exactly what you're saying, which I support, is in here, in my opinion.
I guess I tend to put a lot of weight on the first sentence of most of these policies.
Yeah, I agree with you, Gianna, that you're right about that, but I think it gets lost in the weeds. It's just a visual thing to
Everything
make
gets
it a
lost.
very short thing
Yeah.
to say, yeah, we do.
I think
We
you're
want-
literally correct. But kind of, you know what
That's all I care about.
I'm saying?
Say that again.
You're literally correct,
Yes.
Gianna. Kind of, I don't know what to call it, spiritually or whatever. I agree with Gary. that-
Advertising.
Yeah,
Right.
Well, now that you say that, I kind of agree with you too, that you get lost in the first one. And it is, those 2 points are 2 different things, really.
right.
Supporting types of businesses, and then the other thing is what kind of incentives you have.
Right.
So separating that,
It's like when I tell my kids, I love you guys, versus like, taking one kid out to lunch and saying, I love you.
So,
It just has a different,
so to keep moving
Like-
forward, how about, I'm just gonna suggest that we vote yes
Oh, yeah, we
on
should vote on
Joseph's
it.
motion. And then when we get to this section, maybe we rehash things. Maybe we cut 3.3 into 2
Okay.
pieces and make the first sentence, or we can just
Gotcha.
rework it. But
Good
that's-
point.
That's what I'm saying. I think we could split 3.3 into 2, one that says promoting and supporting, and the other one would be, here's the tools that we're gonna utilize to promote, so, but
Okay, so all in favor of adding a very specific section around tax incentives to support, encourage businesses? Aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Okay,
I have one other.
go for it.
Here, go for it, okay. I make a motion that we amend the motion by adding a policy, support tools and processes that will allow city officials to feel comfortable placing key points in writing to inquiring businesses. Now, there's probably a way to say that better, and I can see Gianna and Chris both kind of looking at me there.
So what you kind of saying is maybe like a little brochure to say, business, if you want to come to Philomath, these are the things you need to know? Is that what you're saying?
No. What I'm saying is, let's say that you want to bring a business to Philomath that will create 25 jobs. And you sit down with the city and say, okay, what is this going to cost me in system development charges? And, there's usually a laundry list of questions. You've been through a million of these meetings. And some of those questions are not really answerable, right? Some of them you just can't you can't say. But a few of them are. One of the ones that is answerable is around fees. If you do X, Y, Z, it will cost you A, B, C. It's spelled out in city code. And it should be possible to have that in writing at the beginning of a project. Now, putting those numbers in writing takes a certain amount of effort and it incurs a certain amount of risk, because now the city's got this piece of paper floating around out there, and unless it has a deadline on it, the developer could say, okay, you said I could pay, whatever it is, $50,000 and get X in return. So as things sit right now, it might not be possible for the city to do that. But I feel strongly that if we support the idea that the city should be able to do those kinds of things and take a look at our processes or our workflows or whatever, that enabling the city to promise certain things to businesses that are coming in would enable those businesses to then make concrete decisions about whether or not to move to Philomath. When you're a business moving to Philomath, you've got to come up with a bunch of plans. You have to talk to public works. You have to find out where sewers and water lines are. You have to talk to contractors and get estimates, and you have to get a bank to underwrite the whole thing. And if that's based on, if there's any piece of that can be nailed down, it makes it simpler for the business to actually pull the trigger on it. The more pieces that are kind of floating around in the air and waiting until the next step to actually see what it is, the harder it is for a business to make a decision. So for example, in that business the imaginary business that I mentioned, that let's say it wanted to bring 25 jobs to Philomath, if that business wants to create, build a building in some specific lot, and they want to put in, 3 bathrooms in this thing and some parking spots, maybe they have some sketches, it should be possible for them to show those plans to the city. And if they meet the satisfaction of the planning official should just say, yes, if you do this thing with this many bathrooms in this lot, I'm going to charge you $150,000 in fees, and this is good for 6 months. And then they've got a piece of paper they can actually take to the bank. Right now, the process is more like, well, can't tell you until you actually submit an application, get it approved, and go through 6 steps into the process. And I think strongly that can be improved.
Actually, I just did that earlier this week.
Yeah, I think we do that already.
We do, if the developer has concrete enough information to be able to provide, I go through and I will do a permit fee. It is an estimate, but it is a permit fee estimate based on the number of bathrooms, the number of mechanical options, the number of branch circuits or square footage and all of that.
I'm familiar with the estimate process. I'm talking about something more than an estimate. An actual guarantee, we will charge exactly this dollar amount within some time frame.
Well, it just seems that.
Well, maybe we should follow our process a little
Yeah.
bit. We're getting into discussion.
Yeah.
So what is your motion again?
The motion was to amend the motion by adding a policy, support tools and processes that will allow city officials to feel comfortable placing key points in writing to empowering businesses. Happy to have that wordsmith. Again, that was the best vague specific I could come up with.
What is insufficient about the estimate, Ruth?
The estimates frequently, the difference between the estimate and the final bill is frequently substantially different.
And that's,
Based on what?
Just based on what the final bill is.
But what would have changed to change the final bill?
So for the business, if the business gets an estimate of $100,000 and whatever, that doesn't mean that they won't be given an actual bill by the city of $200,000. It's literally just an estimate that no one can be held to, and so it makes it hard.
Yeah, I mean, the estimate only changes if there's new inputs that are added. Otherwise, the estimate's gonna be what the estimate is, or if the fees change, they get updated annually or every couple of years. And
Exactly, which is why it shouldn't be that hard for us to be able to put it in writing, because if nothing changes, then the estimate is.
So can I ask if there's a second before we have any more discussion?
I guess I'll second it for further discussion.
Okay.
I guess the point, I'm not necessarily in favor of it, because invariably the developer is going to come back with all these changes and say, well, you told me it'd be this amount. And then you have a squabble about, well, that's not what we said it was for. And you've changed what you want. And I don't know, if you have an estimate and you take that to the bank and they understand it's going to be about this amount, depending on what I, as the developer, does in wanting to change it, they're on the hook for that. The downside of it is they'll come back, and no matter what changes they make, they'll say, well, you promised this amount. And then you have an argument about that, which will never work.
There's also a time component to where if they have that dollar amount, they come back a year and a half later, something might have changed.
Right. So Chris, I'm really curious to hear kind of your in-depth thoughts on this, because obviously, you would be the one using this, or that it would affect.
Mhm.
Do you think that there's a way for you, the planning official, to give anything in writing to a business where, like, I officially, the city says $150,000.26 if you do it before June 32nd, or, whatever it is, and then boom, here you go, that's it. If, with, based on these stipulations, is there any way to make that more than an estimate?
Yeah, I think I understand the question. There's layers it builds, right? And so it's very hard when somebody first comes in the door and has an idea. They're not going to walk out of the door with any letter from me with my name on it, with the
Right.
price on it, right? Because there's too many unknowns.
Right.
And what typically happens is that, we are kind of general rule of thumb, and we fudge on this all the time, was, we'll afford the city planner or time with myself, 15, 20 minutes, come in, sit down, spitball the idea around with us a little bit. And I can talk you through what kind of application you're going to need, what the fees are with that application for the land use decision, and talk you through what the process can be, what kind of time frame you're looking at. In general, I'll point in the direction like, hey, you really should start talking to a wetland, somebody to look at wetlands for you. You might look at this or that. So I'm going to give you some direction based on that site. If you're looking at access, I might have you talk to ODOT. So I'm going to send you with a list of things to go and do. And that's free. That's a free service that the city provides. We don't charge anything for it. When you get beyond that point, and you to a point where you've got stuff written out and everything else, there's another step in there. There's a profession in there that often gets overlooked that the city ends up filling a role for, and that's a professional planner. And a professional planner is hired by a property owner, developer, and they'll read through the city's code, they'll interpret the city's code, they'll prepare the application, they'll prepare the site plan, the landscape plan, all that, based on what's in the code, they'll have all that information, prepared all that. And so then when they come in, the next time that we see them, say, hey, we want to have a pre-application meeting, they pay $125 and they get the city manager, the planner, the public works director, and the fire life and safety lieutenant. And they get us around the table, and we typically take as much time as it needs. It's usually half an hour to an hour and a half. And we talk about their project in specifics. Based on what you wanted us to do, what you're wanting to do, here's the entire process you'll need to do. Here's where your water lines are, your sewer lines are, all that type of information. So there's some certainty there, but even then, they're not walking out the door with a piece of paper that has any pricing on it. It's here's the process you're gonna need to follow. And then we get the application in. When we get the application, here's what we want to do. Here's the subdivision we want to make, right? Or here's the development we want to do. And then there's, again, a level of uncertainty about how many bathrooms are there actually going to be. I mean, so even then there's a layer of, okay, we're going to get you through in front of the planning commission or in front of the planner, and you'll get a land use decision. But now you've got to have a pre-design meeting with the engineer, and your engineer and our engineer are going to talk, and they're going to talk about how long is the pipe going to be? How big is the pipe going to be? And so again, there's all these other entities that come into it. So until you get past a pre-design meeting and really get to where you're submitting your actual design plans, that's what we're going to go off of to get a building permit estimate and an SDC estimate and be able to tell you what those costs are going to be. And again, so, based on what you've submitted, now we can give you those estimates, and those aren't going to change unless what you've submitted is going to change, and then it's going to be reflected that way. So I mean, I get where you're going from it, but, you know, we try to be very helpful to businesses that come into the city hall, but what you're asking specifically is at some earlier level in the planning stage, I mean, you get something with the city's letterhead and my signature with a set price on it, and typically my experience has been, you just don't have enough certainty at that early enough in the stage to come up with those documents. And that's typically when you're talking to the bank and talking into and trying to get us. I get that, right? But there is a certain amount of uncertainty and risk that comes with development. And I wish that wasn't the case, but then everybody would do it. There is a certain level of uncertainty that goes into that. Some of that uncertainty can be hedged by hiring professional planners to work for you, hiring engineers to work for you and all that, but that's extra expense. And I get that too.
So those expenses, those things that people are gonna write a check to the city for, are all those individual elements completely published and visible publicly?
We have a schedule of all of the plan use fees. We have a schedule of all the permits and what the costs are.
So
Those get updated.
if somebody had all that data, they could do their own estimate, the one that Ruth did.
If not, I would say that we've had developers come in and they presented a very specific, I've received 4-page lists of questions about all the different types and aspects of potential impacts, fee impacts. And again, like Chris said, no fee on my part. I go through and I will provide that information for that project. I may never see that project, but we'll answer every question that's given to us.
Yeah.
As long as it's giving us enough information to answer the question.
But of those questions, if they had done their homework, are the answers to those questions available?
Many of them are available. But yeah, there may be a few. I mean, it depends on the angle of the question.
All right.
So I think this is exactly my point. And for all the people that waste your guys' time and ask a million questions and do anything, I apologize. I don't care about them.
That's
You
the
know, want them in
process.
their
We
town.
don't consider it a waste of time. We're
Yeah,
happy to answer the
but
question.
the fact that you can have a developer that is well prepared enough that they'll submit 4 pages of questions when the code is published suggests that there's still a lot of uncertainty out there. Because if the developer really thought, I'm talking about a well-prepared developer, not the one that's wasting your time. For a well-prepared developer, if they believed that they could read the code and the code clearly spelled it out and the price wouldn't change, they would have very little reason to ask you that many questions. It really underlies the fact that there's some amount of uncertainty out there. Now, I hear what you're saying, that everything you guys do takes time, takes you away from other projects and stuff like that. So maybe the question could be, is there any price at which it would be worth it to the city to lock in a dollar amount or a rate or something for some limited amount of time? Or a prepayment of the fees? If you guys said in your estimate, this is gonna cost $150,000, and the developer gave you a non-refundable 10%, here's $15,000, would it then be worth it to sign that estimate and say, okay, this is good for 6 months?
Yeah, I mean, we do that in part. I mean, we collect $125 for the pre-application meeting. And we feel like they're getting good information there, and they'll often hold us to that, right? It's like, hey, you didn't mention that in the pre-application meeting, that you also had to do a partition in addition to this, right? So, and when that happens, and it's not uncommon to waive a fee, right? It's like, you're right, this is an extra process, we should have covered it, we missed it, we won't charge for it, we'll just wrap it in, right? So that's happened in the past, not often, fortunately. But, we work with them. I'm trying to get back to the spirit of the motion and where you're getting to, which is to, support practices and policies that will enable staff to, be able to give some type of written guarantee. I just have an issue with the written guarantee, which is what everybody wants. But that written guarantee just comes with so many, I don't know that it's in the city's benefit. I get that there's a benefit to the property owner. I don't know that you're necessarily benefiting the city. And there's just a lot of uncertainty there. So I don't know. It's just a difficult motion, but I understand the gist of it. So if there's a way to rephrase it to where we're not, I don't know. I get the spirit of what you're going for.
Okay. I have a question for you, Joseph. This isn't just my argument. It's definitely a question. My feeling is that a lot of this kind of perception comes from people who approach a new project And then they just feel like they get nickeled and dimed with a whole bunch of stuff because they really didn't understand the full process before they started. And that's probably true of everything I've ever done in my life. So do you know of like specific instances where somebody felt like they made no changes, but then there were more fees that showed up? Or is it really more a sense of the complexity of designing a major project and things pop up that mean they're gonna have to pay more money in a lot of different areas? So I don't perceive that it's really a huge problem, but is there something specific you know about that?
The reason that I'm thinking about this specifically is because of our project on 19th Street. And I don't really want to go into details, but one of the major obstacles we faced with planning the project was insecurity about what the final bill was actually going to be.
So my question is, does any amount of city code change that? Because like I feel like that's the very nature of development is
We felt,
what's the bill going to be?
and I wasn't, I'm not the one running the project, so I'm getting this secondhand.
Yeah.
But we felt that Chris specifically did basically everything in his power to help us out. He was extremely, extremely helpful, kind, and forthright. But we felt like there was this invisible barrier where we couldn't actually get promised anything.
Right.
And if you go to, any store or any contractor, they'll give you a bid and they'll say, okay, we will give you this for this number of dollars, 180 days, and that no amount of love or money would get the city to do that.
Yeah. And I guess my perception is part of the problem is the way the government works. They're not a private owner that's selling bicycles can decide to give you $10 off just because he wants to make the sale.
I guess
the government's got to charge you, $127.13 because that's what the code says. And so they're not really free to wheel a deal. And so because of that, it's harder to make guarantees like that. Right.
The problem I think comes into interpretation of the code because there's a lot of complexity in these documents, as Mr. Workman has said, and whether a given item is interpreted in one category versus another can change with time. And maybe it was interpreted one way for the estimate, but then a different way when the final bill came due. And so if it was possible to get those interpretations written down, even if someone had to pay a substantial amount of money up front for that, it would make entire projects far more feasible, just because they know, okay, that is definitely being classified as whatever, a washroom or a toilet or a 22-person use, whatever, so many gallons and whatever, because it's very easy for one little thing to be interpreted without the law changing, one thing to be interpreted, times however many bathrooms or units, and now suddenly the SDC fees double or the price changes. So I'm just looking for one fixed interpretation, maybe not even a dollar amount, but an interpretation. We're going to interpret this as such. Signature.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Here's $10,000 for taking that risk, city.
Yeah, again, it's getting into the weeds. There's a provision in the code that allows for you to just ask for a planning official decision or interpretation of the code, and so that's a separate formal process to go through. We want an interpretation, your interpretation of this code. How's it going to be interpreted? And you fill out the application, you submit what your reference to do, and I'll give you that letter, and I'll say, here's my interpretation. So you can do those. If it's outside, if it's an engineering type question, I'll go back to the city engineer. That's part of the problem is I'm not a city engineer, right, or a public works director. And so when you're asking me questions, you're going to want to check with the city engineer. Your engineer is going to need to talk to the city engineer because some of those, like you mentioned, classifications and that, some of that gets interpreted by the building official, right? And so that's a building permit question on how it would be interpreted. And we can ask Ruth, and Ruth will either know, or she'll go to the book, or she'll go to the building official and say, hey, how is this going to be classified? So some of that, again, you just don't know until you've got the specifics.
Again, I want to make it clear, I'm not trying to say anybody's not doing a stellar job, but it's when I know that, for example, you or Ruth, one of you guys is going to be writing the final bill, and you're the same person writing the estimate, it seems hard to understand why those two things have to be, one has to be unknown.
Can I hear the motion again? What's the specific language?
I'd appreciate it if Commissioner Sullivan would read the motion again since he has it written in writing in front of him.
Okay.
The motion is to amend the main motion by adding a policy support tools and processes that will allow city officials to feel comfortable placing key points in writing to inquiring businesses. Or we could say inquiring potential developers, I guess.
I guess,
Councillor Coffey.
I should.
I just wanted to ask, when someone is given the final bill, wouldn't you be reviewing that against your estimate with them to see what had changed?
Yeah, I mean, I'll admit, I don't typically give, the only thing I really give an estimate on ever is the like system development charges, but I'm not given permit fee estimates. I mean, I do tell, I mean, the application itself has the cost of the application fee, so that's given on the form. But there's I mean, there's system development charges, there's your permitting fees, and then there's your land use application fees. There's a deposit that's due when you get to pre-engineering, which is a percentage of the infrastructure project, and that number can change until the engineer says, here's the number, and we collect 4% off of that for review as a deposit. And then you've got, I mean, there's other things that come up, right? So, but yes, we would compare, if I gave somebody a estimate said, if you do a 3/4 inch line or you do a 2-inch water line, and you've got this much occupancy and it's warehouse and commercial use, or it's whatever use, and this many trips, then this would be your SDCs. When we get to that point of that specificity, thank you, then yeah, that's locked in, right? I mean, that SDC portion is locked in, but it's not gonna tell you anything about when a month later the engineer discovers that water line's too close because there's an easement there that we just discovered, and now you got to shift it, and it's going to increase the budget by $50,000. That doesn't get captured in the SDCs, but it's going to impact the overall project $50,000 or $100,000, right? So there's just some uncertainties.
You know, it seems to me that this process is probably very similar to what's done in any other city. Would you?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're that different. Yeah, I don't want to sound, if anything, sometimes we help too much. We try to fill that role of the planner, the professional planner that represents the project and is reading the code, interpreting the code, presenting everything, and then submitting all of that on behalf of the applicant to the city. We are often able to help a property owner enough through the process that they don't have to hire that extra person. That between Ruth and myself and Pat and Kevin and Denny, we just try to be maybe overly helpful. Instead of saying, this is incomplete, you need to resubmit, we actually sit down with you and like work through it and go through the project a little bit more and take a little bit more time, which takes more time, but we're a small city, and that's what I like about being a small city, is we can make some judgment calls and take a little bit more time on those projects and save having to do that step. The reality is maybe the project is better off if we just say, you need to hire a professional and resubmit this, right? And maybe the end product ends up being better, and it's easier for staff to do an interpretation because then we have all of the facts in front of us and we can give some more certainty rather than working with them through the process. We just look at it at the final end stage after it's been worked through, and we have more certainty through there. Again, some projects work that way, right? We've had when Dollar General, for example, when they came in, here's our plans, here's our layout, here's our everything. They did the pre-app. It's like, you got to do a zone change, and boom, boom, boom. And it was just, I feel like they felt like they had all the answers to all the questions that they had, and they didn't have a lot of questions.
They were the ones who actually sent me the 4-page question list early on, even though they have a very professional department that reviews all of those things. And she had reviewed many things online. She did want specific answers to questions.
And I will just say that it is not possible to write a code like that in a way that people will not have questions. because professionals can work on something like that for generations and try to get it nailed down. There's always different situations and different people are going to see it differently. So that's a fact of life.
I think
To a
it's
large
also
degree.
not possible to write code that will make someone comfortable putting something in writing. That's,
I guess I think, and I won't name any names, but some cities have better reputations than others for working with landowners and developers, right? Some are just, you feel like they're trying to get to know all the time. It's like, nope, resubmit, nope, denied, resubmit, right? And we don't go that route, especially with commercial and industrial properties. It's like, we're trying to get you to yes, like, what do you want to do with your project? How do we help you get there? And I feel like we try to navigate through that. But again, sometimes that means we get too close to the project and there's changes and shifts along there. And then we kind of get pulled into those changes and shifts as opposed to just being like, nope, resubmit. And when you have a final deal, then we'll either approve it or not approve it, and we just try to be more flexible, I guess.
I don't feel comfortable voting yes on the motion the way that it's worded now. If it was less specific about, and that word uncomfortable or feel comfortable, that seems like it's out of place in the language. But if it was more general about the city endeavoring to make costs for development as clear as possible and assisting, and if it was more generically.
If you have some suggested words, I can amend my motion. If that's all right.
That is all right. If I can find the words.
So the way it started was amending the motion by adding a policy, support tools and process that will allow city officials to.
Clearly communicate.
Okay.
that's a skill.
No, that's the first. I'll de-skill it. Clearly communicate. What's the right words for all the costs it takes to clearly communicate costs
Associated with the development.
associated with development, city costs associated with development. And that's a statement I think hopefully that's a statement we can all stand behind.
So
But I don't know if it's specific enough for you.
no, that's fine. I have no problem with that.
Or if it's complete enough.
So it would then read, support tools and processes that will allow city officials to clearly communicate city costs associated with development in writing to inquiring businesses.
Yeah, that's easier.
So I amend, can I amend my motion? Do I have to make a motion?
Yeah, I seconded it.
Okay, I'll just read it out loud again so we're all on the same page. Support tools and processes that will allow city officials to clearly communicate city costs associated with development in writing to inquiring businesses.
I like that a lot, and I think, maybe there's some way to improve the way the city charges for things that make it easier to make assurances up front. It's less specific about number of toilets or whatever it is.
Right, there's a
Right.
lot of different ways we could do this, and one way might be
Right.
simplifying the fee structure or something,
Right.
who knows?
So,
I'll re-second it,
okay.
if that's needed.
Oh, sorry, I jumped into discussion, didn't I? Got out of order
I-
myself.
Should we vote?
I think we should. All in favor of the motion, to amend the motion as amended? Raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? You are opposed? Passes? 5-10. Okay. Is there anything else missing, or can that bring us to the beginning of overview?
I'm good.
Now, good time for a break.
Yes, it would be a great time for a break.
No cookies?
No, I'm sorry,
I
no
know.
cookies
That was a
tonight.
terrible thing to have done.
I know.
She spoiled
Once.
us last
I
time.
know.
You did,
Okay.
you brought
Please
cookies
note, we are
last
still
time?
live
Last time, yeah.
He heard
my
you weren't
daughter
coming,
made
so he brought
cookies.
cookies.
Oh.
Did everybody
My
hear
husband even asked
everybody hear the
about it.
reminder that we're still live streaming?
anymore.
I know it.
Okay.
It was very unusual.
That's hilarious.
Say no, Francis.
Okay,
Do it the second time.
we're reconvening the City of Philomath Planning Commission meeting, discussing the economic development chapter of the comprehensive plan. And at this point, since we're doing motions to amend, does anyone have any questions on the overview or any motions to make revisions to the overview section, the first two paragraphs? You're going to slow down the meeting this time?
All right, just
Mr.
one.
Workman.
I think we should reference I cheated a little bit. I need to go back and look at what appendix number or letter the economic opportunities analysis is. So just then the last paragraph, rather than just saying, which is now an appendix to the conference plan, I'll say, which is now appendix A or appendix B or whatever it is. So if you're okay, just me citing that more specifically. Kind of caught that after the fact.
You have to make a motion.
He can. You can.
You can make a motion.
I'm okay if you don't, or we don't.
Yeah, I
Is
think,
everybody else okay?
minor modifications, I'm going to say don't need a motion unless someone objects.
Can be done by consensus or
Yes.
motion. Yeah, so there's consensus.
Move on to context. Commissioner Bernardini.
I just have a question on line 33. I love line numbers.
Yes.
When it says Philomath has about 29 lots smaller than 5 acres, does that mean vacant, available lots, or is that within the city there are 29 lots altogether?
Good question. If you don't have an answer right away.
Yeah, whatever it is, it should be available lots, right?
Aren't they vacant or partially vacant? Isn't that how it's defined?
Not fully developed or something like
It
that.
says some of these may be subdivided into smaller sites.
Or,
I can look and then I can add that language in here. So
Okay.
it would read Philomath has about 29 either undeveloped or partially developed or 29 total developed and undeveloped. So if we're okay with that by consensus, I can just add that clarifying language in
Yeah.
there into what type of lots.
I was just curious because, yeah, I wasn't sure about that.
or just 29 lots that could have additional development for commercial
But we
use.
don't know. If we have 29 lots in town, 20 of them are
Right,
not,
however
29 of them are
many,
developed.
yeah.
Whatever, we'll clarify that and then we're good.
Commissioner Yoder.
Line 38. I believe that since such as sewer infrastructure in the northern part of town is actually from an action item from the Echo Northwest, I was wondering if, and it's pretty specific, that maybe in this comprehensive plan, it should just say that should be removed and just say lack of infrastructure to service industrial land is a barrier to development of industrial land, instead of being specific.
I'm okay with that. Was there, do you think there's a point of putting it in there? I mean, it isn't.
I feel like it's important there because that is one of the key things that would need to be done to fully develop the commercial and industrial property in the city is sewer infrastructure on the north part of town. Is that a true statement?
Yes.
It's still pretty specific.
That's okay.
Oh, I did.
This is the context section. This
Okay.
is not goals, policies, or anything.
It's still
this is-
specific.
It's context for economic development, and it's not asking the city to do anything. It's just kind of giving a clue that if you want the city of Philomath to develop more, one of the things you're gonna need to deal with is infrastructure, and by the way, sewers
This is a big deal.
is a big deal. I mean,
Okay.
I don't see the problem with that, and I think the document is a little bit less without it.
It's just a flag.
It's a flag.
It has to be considered.
Mhm.
I'm good with it.
Okay.
Counselor Cosby.
On line 40, I'm wondering if we should include, in addition to landowners and developers, if we should include granting agencies or grant-making agencies, rather than put the whole onus on landowners and developers.
Yeah, so
Mm.
grant-making agencies can help develop infrastructure. Is that something that happens?
But see, that's specific in one of the other areas, isn't it,
Yeah,
about?
we talked about. Does anybody want to make a motion to add that in or not?
Actually,
Or-
you could be working with the voters as well.
Hmm.
Correct?
I think the point here was some of these are on, some of this would be in private property, and so it'd be a matter, I think that was the focus here, was you're gonna have to work with these private property owners and developers as they develop their property to extend these services to and through their properties, as opposed to where you're coming at is where the city would work with a funding source, whether that be the public or a granting agency or the state, to put the infrastructure in. It's a little different than what I'm interpreting. To me, this is more about working with property owners and where the infrastructure is actually gonna go, working with them on easements and those types of things,
I
as
see.
opposed to how you would pay for it. But by adding that in there, it kind of broadens that scope out, which is appropriate. What if it was landowners, developers, and like funding sources? To develop infrastructure to serve key industrial sites?
I'll make that motion
Um,
to add that, what he just
How
said.
about a minor modification to that? Can you just say the city will need to identify funding sources and work with landlords and developers to develop infrastructure?
Mhm.
But does the city always identify the funding sources?
How about, not always.
Yeah, sometimes it's public, sometimes it's the private property owner.
Which would mean it should be at the end. Because you're always gonna work with the landowner. At least how I read things anyway.
So do you have a specific?
Oh, well, my motion was to, as Chris had said, the city will need to work with landowners, developers, and funding sources to develop infrastructure.
That works.
Consensus, or you wanna
Well, I made a motion.
I'll second it.
second? First and second.
Those in favor?
I
Aye. Unanimous.
I like that, adding the funding into that.
It's too late, we all are.
I like that. I like it too.
Anything else on context? Goal 1, land supply.
I'll make a motion that we, on line 52, change that to read goal 1, land supply and infrastructure. Because half of those policies are infrastructure issues.
Okay,
I agree.
is that a second?
That's a second.
All in favor?
Right.
Unanimous again? Commissioner Bernini.
Line 68, says infrastructure availability on employment land. I don't know what that is.
Which line?
68.
68,
16.
availability on employment land. It's on land that people would be employed.
Job creating land.
I know it is.
That's
That
how I
was-
took
Calling
it.
a place of business.
Yes,
My
that-
employment
I would
land.
agree, but this is kind of corny.
How about just on land supporting,
How about industrial?
businesses that
Or,
provide
well, it
jobs?
wouldn't be just industrial, right? Where'd that
Yeah, I don't know.
employment land come from?
Probably Eco Northwest.
Yeah.
Seems like a planning type term.
It's one word rather than the 4 or 5 that it takes to say anything else.
Yeah. So what was the,
What was your word?
I didn't like it much.
Oh, what, you had a suggestion.
Yeah, I know, I didn't like my suggestion.
Oh.
we just say
On land-
industrial and commercial land?
Yeah, I think that's more understandable. It's probably better.
It's used throughout the document in other
Land.
places, just
So-
industrial and
Land
commercial.
supporting. employment? No.
Just in industrial and
Yeah.
commercial
Yeah,
land.
Yeah, that's what it means.
We don't even have to say the zoning, it's just land is good for that. Commissioner Yoder?
Policy 11, I just need a clarification on, because 56, 57, 58 provide for an adequate supply of commercial industrial land. But on 25 in the context, it says Philomath has enough employment land.
Huh?
Philomath has enough employment land to accommodate growth. And then it talks about how we have enough land for 20 years worth. So in my mind, it's saying in the context, we have enough
Yeah.
land to accommodate. And then on policy 11, it says that we need to like take more action to provide for an adequate supply of commercial land. So either I'm misunderstanding, which could be.
So the context to me is the present condition, and the policy under goal 1 is that we're going to do this, and this prevents us from changing all that industrial and commercial land zoning to,
To something.
R3 or whatever.
residential.
Well, and plus it is, I guess when I read that, 10 years from now, maybe we don't have enough, so we'll need to provide. So I see your point.
Yeah, because the analysis that we're using says we have enough.
Right.
You don't need to change zones to make more.
Right.
It just didn't seem very clear to me.
Provide for means it also means you don't get rid of what you have, right?
It could.
So I think it's important as a goal, even if there's no action items around that goal for the present conditions.
I have a separate question if we're not taking action on that. Are policy 1.2 and policy 1.3 similar enough that we don't need both of them? And the first part of 1.2 was kind of captured in 1.1, right? Monitor and replenish supply of commercial industrial land. But then you've got serviced by infrastructure. So it's accessible to commercial industrial land, which is kind of what 1.3 says.
Chris, I got a question on that. I'm actually confused by both these a little bit because expanding infrastructure into land so that it can be developed is a frightfully expensive process. So are we it's a great process and I'm not against it. I'm just curious, are we really thinking that the city could come up with some money that could like roll water or sewer lines, 500 feet down some road or whatever and make it development ready? Like, is that a real possibility?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's cool.
Yeah, but I'm thinking like the sewer line up 19th Street is a good example. It's in the wastewater master plan. It's really too expensive for any one project to do on their own. It's probably about a $3 million project based on one of the estimates I saw. And so, if you're looking to put in a new business up on 19th Street and you gotta, how do you put in a $3 million sewer line for a small business up on North 19th, but yet any new business up on North 19th Street needs to connect into a new system. So it's on some of those projects, it's going to take the city investing in some of that infrastructure to get it up there if we're gonna have sites available for future development.
I guess I do see these two as different. I mean, the coordinate the capital improvement planning, I guess in my mind, that's different than just monitor and replenish the supply. Maybe it isn't. Maybe as I say that, maybe it isn't.
I feel like you could get rid of 1.2 and 1.3 would cover it because 1.3 is like specifically what the city needs to do as opposed to just.
We could add for
It's got the funding part.
For 1.3, you could add coordinate capital improvement planning of water, wastewater, transportation to ensure infrastructure availability, blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, if you wanted to be called out water, sewer, transportation, but then you're kind of omitting stormwater and, well, I guess just stormwater would be the one you'd be omitting.
We don't say it includes everything, right? So if we just omit 1.2 and allow 1.3 to assume the burden.
I'm fine with deleting 1.2 just because it is redundant.
I'll move we omit, delete policy 1.2.
Joseph, I'm gonna suggest speaking up, because we are
I move-
broadcasting and just
Thank
saying,
you. Thank you,
everybody, I want to just kind of encourage everybody to keep speaking.
Yeah, thank you. I make a motion to amend the main motion that we delete policy 1.2.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous?
Gary, I've got one thing here. It's not really to the scope of the motion yet necessarily, but it's just a kind of a question for you guys. One interesting thing stands out about the context section, to jump back to that for just a second. Line 18, Philomath is forecast for growth in both commercial and industrial employment sectors. Now, if memory serves, when you read the Econ Northwest report, what it actually said is that Philomath is not forecast for growth. Well, bear with me for a second. Jobs have been declining, but the greater Philomath area has been seeing an increase in jobs. So their forecast is going to be that Philomath will kind of pick it back up and start growing jobs either. Since this context is trying to provide a background for where our thought processes are right now, might it be clearer if we specify that the greater Philomath area is forecast for growth? So this isn't something I care desperately about, so I'm not making a motion right now. I just want to see what you guys think. But the thought would be to replace the greater Philomath area is forecast for growth instead of Philomath is forecast for growth, since that's more representative of what it actually said in the Econ Northwest report.
By the greater Philomath area, do you mean within the urban growth boundary?
No, I think it was larger than that. It was like Benton County or something. They said Philomath, over the last however many years they looked at, Philomath shrunk by like 1.76% of jobs, but Benton County grew by X number of percent, so we're forecasting Philomath will grow.
Yeah, they were using information on in a larger section than just Philomath.
It's a very minor point, and if you guys want to move on, I don't care that much, but so I'll just throw it out in this form of motion. You can vote it down if you don't like. I'm making a motion to amend the motion, replacing the word Philomath with the greater Philomath area.
Well, I think you'd have to define.
Yeah, I don't, that phrase doesn't really define what it means to me.
What if
If
we
you're
just said,
talking about Benton
Benton
County.
County.
what if we just said the area? Or did you want to specifically say Benton? Because Econ Northwest did say they're an organization and they made a forecast, right or wrong, and that forecast was Philomath for growth. But if you read the details, the reason they're doing it is really because they forecast Benton County for growth. So you could say Benton County's forecast for growth.
But we have
True, but if the net
jurisdiction
result
over
is
that.
that Paloma will grow too, it doesn't really matter why, I guess, right? Or,
I think they just didn't want to say Philomath is not forecast for growth because it's, who wants to put that in the report?
well, it is. I mean, not,
They forecasted it for growth. They did.
That's
I
true.
mean,
Commissioner Sullivan
because of,
forecasts are always-
maybe, not because of Paloma specific things maybe, but for whatever reason, the ultimate result will be that there will be growth, right?
They're from Eugene, who knows?
So the first sentence on line 17 is the summary of the economic opportunities analysis provides the following context. So it does reference the document. It's not just making a blank statement. It's saying this is the summary, and this literally got copied and pasted directly out of that summary. So this is the summary of the economic opportunities analysis. You can take issue with the economic opportunities analysis, but this is the summary of it. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like there's already a footnote there because it's telling you where the statements are coming from.
Yeah, I guess I'm fine with it like this in the sense that, well, it's Philomath specific that we're talking about, and they did come up with these numbers in that analysis. And then it might have been through a broader area, but they took it and put it as Philomath.
I mean, if we want to put anything there, you put Eco Northwest forecasted that Philomath was,
I don't think that really changes anything. It just sounds like the motion's gonna go without a second.
I was gonna say, has there been a second to this motion?
No, there has not.
On items,
Commissioner Bernardini.
I'm sorry, I just speak up. You know.
I just wanted to say policy 1.5, I thought was very good. Thank you. I think you captured we had a lot of parking discussion, and I think 1.5 nicely corralled all of those ideas.
I agree.
It's missing one. Uh-oh, I got my hand up now.
Oh, okay, hold on. Really quickly, policy 1.4 though, just a wording slightly where it says to reduce infrastructure costs without negative impact. When I read that kind of jumped out, and I felt like, why would there be negative impact?
to promote instead of without negative impacts.
Well, we had a long discussion about that we were worried about reducing infrastructure costs in such a way that would provide less services or cost the city
Right.
more money.
It's not the concept, it's just that negative impacts, maybe even just without negatively impacting the health, safety, or whatever, but there's no reason that reducing infrastructure costs would have a negative impact per se.
That is true.
To reduce infrastructure costs without reducing the quality of the services provided, or like I say, even just without negatively impacting the health, safety. This is just a wordy thing.
So that a motion to change it to negatively impacts or negatively impacting.
I hate that word, but I feel like that makes more sense.
So I'm not clear.
So, it would-
It's a really minor point.
so you're saying the
Okay.
costs without negatively impacting the health? Is that what you're saying?
It's, yeah. concern is that if we reduce our costs, that then we'll reduce the services themselves, right? So we're saying, let's bring down the costs without without negatively affecting the health, safety, or service. Without negatively affecting,
But isn't that what it says? I mean, with different words?
yeah, that's what I'm saying. This is strictly a wording. I'm not arguing the point. I'm just saying that, but this is taking more time than I wanted to, so next.
All right.
It was a really small point. Let's just keep going.
Okay.
Let's roll. Goal 2.
So
No, Peggy had a thing.
actually, that brings us to Commissioner Hunsaker, but
Sorry.
he might want to
Yes.
defer. I don't know.
Well, and it was on 75, it was a question more than anything. It says, manage parking in the downtown area. What are we calling the downtown area?
So we've done a better job of defining it based on like the downtown or the Main Street plan refers to the downtown area and it defines that area. It's 14th or maybe 15th to 10th or something like that, but this doesn't necessarily reference that.
Okay, because I didn't know I don't know if it means clear down here or if it's just between 12th and 14th, or that downtown used to be between 12th and 14th.
I think the concern is that downtown area, I believe, several of the recommendations are to expand the C1, which is traditionally what we call our downtown zone, the C1 zone. And so I didn't want to be too specific. I was trying to be general on purpose because I think that eventually a year from now, at some point, that downtown area is going to change. So I didn't want to define it specifically other than it's the downtown area.
Okay.
Would it be the area-wide plan? Would that be the same area, which is Main and Applegate Street between 11th and 15th?
And it goes up 13th, but it doesn't cover like south of Applegate, which I would still consider maybe part of that downtown area. So
Okay.
it's intentionally vague, but if that's problematic, then.
No, I like that.
Well,
I like it big.
okay,
Big is good.
okay, I'm good. That's all I have.
Mr. Yoder.
Same policy 1.5 is that one of the things that we talked about, even with the Echo Northwest, was shared parking. And shared parking is, other cities are doing it, instead of creating a new parking spot, okay, you rent out Pioneer or something, or you rent out soft shoe parking, you rent out areas that are already established. They get something for it. I don't know what it would be, but it's actually advocated by in the handbook, for TGM handbook too. But it just works for some cities, and then maybe it would be a good one for us to put in there that if we're already talking about such things as parking districts and space requirements and all this, that shared parking might be something at least to consider. So maybe just put shared parking in the body of that somewhere.
So is that a motion?
I like that.
You want to list it after designed RV and truck parking and before and other appropriate measures?
So
Or put it, parking districts, shared parking, minimum, maximum park, put it up a little bit more at the top, I guess.
right after parking districts.
Right after parking districts, yeah, that's what.
Okay. I think we all agree on that. It seems like. Commissioner Hunsaker.
Do we,
Was that a consensus of the?
I'm not sure yet.
Oh, okay.
Are you disputing the consensus on that?
no, I
Okay,
was
so
already moving
it was
on.
a consensus, yes.
Thank you.
Commissioner,
Can I clarify the consensus? Was it shared? I know we said shared parking or shared parking areas, or like shared parking lots, just shared parking, is that?
I think
Yeah,
shared
well,
parking.
the TGM actually calls it shared parking. They go
Okay.
into more specifics about what it is,
Okay.
but I think a shared parking lot would be just as adequate.
I think shared parking's enough.
Okay.
Okay.
One less word is better. Commissioner Hunsaker.
Okay. Should employees be included in there, or are they part of businesses?
Where are you at?
I'd say they're part of businesses,
And not, of course, they're not customers and residents.
because it's businesses, customers, and residents. It's the businesses.
Okay, good enough.
That's just me.
I'm fine.
Anything else on goal 1? Goal 2?
Got my hand up again.
Commissioner Hunsaker.
Policy 2.1, it says, work with regional partners to plan for development of industrial land. Are we gonna work with them in doing our planning? I guess I think there's some word not right there. Or are we gonna be working with them? Yes?
Yeah, the hope would be to.
To work
We
with
kind of do that now.
to-
You know, if
Okay,
any of these agencies came to us and said, hey, we think this sort of change to your zoning would benefit you, or
okay,
doing this sort of thing.
okay, I'm good.
I guess when I'm thinking plan there, Commissioner Hunsaker, it's not maybe what we're doing now, but when you get like a site specific,
Yeah.
we're definitely reaching out to Business Oregon and Real and, you know, whatever partners we think we can pull into a project to help plan that site specific area, yeah.
In that planning process, yeah, right, gotcha.
Commissioner Yoder.
Line 98. A close-knit building fabric just seems to jump out. It's like, it just seems out of place. I know what it is. Is to bridge the gaps in between buildings, but is that really, that just doesn't seem like it fits in a policy to me, but did that jump out at anybody else?
I think it would read more clear if we just got rid of that and the parentheses and just replace close-knit building fabric with limit gaps between buildings. Would that not be the same thing? And
But isn't that more of a building materials type of thing instead of a policy? It seems like it'd be more like in a zone in the manual other than in this.
well, the fabric just means limiting the gaps between buildings. It
It
doesn't
does.
mean materials. So
You
the
know, like
fabric
a
is
close
close-knit.
knit community.
Well, yeah, and it's
I mean, that's the same sort of,
kind of architects speak for the different things being woven closely together so you don't have big holes in it. But can we just delete a close-knit building fabric parentheses IE and then close parentheses, and just so that it says limit gaps between buildings? Support active ground floor uses, limit gaps between buildings.
Well, see, I took the Main Street plan to support active ground floor uses and restrict uses that are da-da-da-da. Actually, I took out the, doesn't mean, it has to be, of course, but a closed-knit building fabric, limit gaps between buildings. That just, yeah, that's, for some reason, it just doesn't seem like it would be a policy, but.
Well, I
It's
think
not
it is
that
a
big a deal.
policy to encourage a downtown area to develop densely so that, you know, the classic small town downtown, if you have a great big open space in the middle of all these buildings, it seems out of place and it seems like there's a hole and it changes the character of it.
Would that include like some alleyways that pop out between buildings or?
Not typically alleyways. I think that Main Street plan refers to parking lots. Like you don't want to have the parking lots beside the buildings because then you get these gaps.
Or different types of developments where you've got all those old buildings and then you've got the new laundromat. That's just very different. It's almost like there's a hole in that block because it's not a fronted building, is what they're talking about.
Okay.
so if you said to support active ground floor uses, limiting gaps between buildings, is that what you were suggesting, Gary?
Well, there's a semicolon there, so to support active ground floor uses, ground floor uses, limit gap between the buildings.
Yes, like it's
And
in
the
the middle.
Oh,
and the restrictions.
so you take out the close-knit
I'd get rid
building fabric
Just make limit
And
gaps between
restrict
buildings.
uses.
and then have that. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and there's something with the wording there, I think you're right, it should say, and restrict uses that are highly auto-oriented.
Yeah,
Is that a consensus?
For me,
Yeah, did you catch that?
I need to go back one.
Yeah.
Probably 2.2. One of the, I'll ask the question maybe. In 2.2, it reads halfway through, and orderly development of highway frontage outside of the downtown area with consolidated accesses. Now, it starts out by saying, evaluate zoning map amendments to expand the downtown area for pedestrian scale development. So I read that, and then I read that next part that is suggesting, talking about highway frontage, that going east, we would allow for commercial development along the highway, on the other side of the creek. Is that saying that, or if it is, then I would say, for many years, the businesses in the community, commercial businesses, have always been against that. And I can appreciate that. I mean, I think we need to infill commercial, to 19th, or I guess you could go to 22nd or 3rd, but going west of that or east of that, I think would be detrimental to the existing businesses in the downtown. I don't think we can afford to have a downtown that reaches from 7th Street to Boulevard Apartments, like, for instance.
Yeah, I kind of feel like that, and the orderly development seems to not fit with the first half of that policy. Am I reading that?
So I think if you had, and allow the orderly development of the highway, so really it's evaluate and I threw numbers in mind, so evaluate zoning map amendments to 1, expand the downtown area for pedestrian development in the downtown area. 2, provide sufficient space for mixed use areas of commercial and residential uses near the downtown area. And 3, allow the orderly development of highway frontage outside of the downtown area with consolidated accesses, coming up with signage, and appropriate levels of landscaping and buffering. So you kind of have the downtown, just outside of downtown, and then your areas outside of downtown.
but it would be stretching out the downtown area, right? I mean,
No, it's saying evaluate the zoning map for the downtown it's really talking about those 3 areas when you're looking at the whole map.
Right, but, okay, I think I understand where you're saying that, but it does put the same thing, commercial and industrial, as I view it, in the same paragraph.
Well, but that's, by adding the numbers, it's 3 separate things. The paragraph is evaluate the zoning map amendments for 3 things. And those 3 things are unrelated.
Okay, all right, I'm good with that.
Because I agree with you, it reads very differently like this, because you think it's kind of like it's all about the downtown, but it's really about the downtown and mixed use and.
Okay, sounds good. I'm fine with
Orderly
that.
development outside of the frontage outside downtown.
Okay,
Yeah, and that 3rd point, the frontage outside the downtown area, is something that we decided that we wanted to keep out of the previous comprehensive plan.
okay, gotcha. And I'm okay with just doing the 1, 2, 3.
Everybody's okay with numbering. I think the numbering helps in that situation.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
think that's one where you could just say evaluate the zoning map evaluate zoning map amendments, period, right? That would be the policy.
Yeah.
But we tried to capture some things like, okay, here's the action item, kind of hinting towards action items, right?
Yes.
Right.
To Commissioner Yoder a little bit, but where there's some policy, there's some action items in there that we kind of give a nod to here, to like, these are the things that we're evaluating the zoning map.
Right.
Try to do.
Yeah, because they were, I mean, you're right, they were action items. There
So
were two different action items.
anything else on goal 2? Commissioner Bernadine?
Another quick wording thing, the goal 2 itself, it says the city will support and encourage development, infill, and redevelopment, especially in areas with existing infrastructure as a way to use land and existing infrastructure more efficiently. I feel like that last clause there, if it just said in areas with existing infrastructure to promote efficient land use. Or something that might be a little less wordy, a little less redundant.
Could you try that one more time? I just didn't catch it all.
I would suggest changing that sentence,
In which policy?
sorry, the title of it itself.
Oh, the title.
Goal 2, development, infill, and redevelopment.
Oh, gotcha.
I think underneath that, I might read a little clearer to just say the city will support and encourage development, infill, and redevelopment, especially in areas with existing infrastructure in a way that promotes efficient land use. Or something.
Is that a motion?
Just that as a way to use land and.
As a way to promote efficient land use, period. So you said.
Something like that.
Would you be okay with keeping the word more in there somewhere? Like more efficient land use, or however you want to say that.
Well, I like the word infrastructure too.
Well,
'Cause
I
I
know,
think
but
that's a
you've
big part
already
of
got it right there. Existing infrastructure is the way to use the existing infrastructure.
Oh, in areas with existing infrastructure. All right.
That's all. It's
Yeah,
mostly
you're-
just the
you're right about
redundancy
that.
of that
Yeah.
there. I was like, let's just tighten this up a little.
I'll retract what I said.
Well, if you just take out and existing infrastructure, that might do
Well, then you just have as a way to use land.
more efficiently.
Oh, right.
Isn't that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
Because it was kind of doing double duty there.
Yep.
I have no objection.
So we're
Again,
striking and
Consensus.
existing infrastructure.
Yes.
Okay. Not adding it.
nothing motion worthy, just a little.
On Paul's, hands,
Commissioner Hunsaker, if there's no one else.
anybody else? Okay. On policy 2.4, and this part is just a question, the very last thing, and open spaces within the main street area. So what is that area? Is it the couplet?
The downtown area. I think of that when I was trying to refer back to the Main Street plan, because that's where
Yeah, you capitalize.
the area-wide plan is actually where it talks about kind of expanding some of these. So maybe it would be better to reference the
Main Street plan.
open spaces.
Oh, within downtown.
Yeah, we could just say within downtown,
Okay,
or the downtown, use the downtown area again.
okay.
If everybody's good with that,
I think that's better.
lowercase d.
Okay, I'm done with 2.
2 is going, on. Goal 3. I have a comment on goal 3. Paul, on line 130, it
says
talks
beverages.
about beverage manufacturing being a potential growth industry, but then we also talk other places about not having beverage manufacturing because it's high water use. So it seems like we shouldn't be calling it out.
I agree. That was.
Well, we probably have to talk about we haven't talked about yet, which is what Chris had added about the water usage. Depends on what happens with that, isn't it?
Well, often those, like beverages, they are high water users.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah, definitely.
we wouldn't want them. We don't want to say we want them.
But
But we
I
do
think
want
that,
them.
I think the discussion falls around the water usage before that. If it's determined that, we're gonna let another Nectar Creek in or whatever. High water users, if we're not going to, we haven't had the discussion really about what the master water plan says of what, so doesn't that hinge on whether or not we leave that in there? Right?
It seems like that discussion should happen before we.
At least go into that section. I mean, it was added to, it looked like that we were gonna have a discussion on it because it's the beginning of this packet.
Well, he provided some information about
Okay,
what the plan says.
okay.
So I actually was kind of curious about that, because I appreciate you providing that, by the way, Chris, that was extremely helpful. Or Ruth, whoever put that in there. But I was kind of curious, because when I think of like a high water user, it mentions beverage companies, I think, okay, well, they're filling up cans with cola or something. Well, do people really drink cola that fast? They would use our water supply? I mean, it must, because it's listed in there. But it feels hard to compare apples and apples, right? So we have a number of accounts here, 1,383 single-family residential accounts, and then we've got 163 commercial accounts. But I can't tell how much the commercial accounts use compared to the single-family residential, and I'm not asking for that number, by the way. But if you take your average cola company, if there is even such a thing, how many houses is that worth? And the reason I'm asking is this: if we have two applications on the table, one is for a cola company and they're going to use 1,000 somethings of water, and the other one is for a multi-family development, and that's going to also use 1,000 somethings of water. Do we have a reason to want one and not want the other, or not? I don't really know the answer to that.
I guess from our housing policies, if the multifamily was for lower end, you'd want that. But I mean, you're right. I mean, if it was for higher, if it was higher end apartments, then you
Right.
could have an argument one way or the other. But
We
I
had
didn't answer your question.
we had a couple years ago, we had, I want to say it was like waist high water on Field and 19th Street. Like it was like, you put a boat on it, I think. And then, there were some ditches and stuff, they weren't keeping up, and we scouted around, and it turned out that I think the mill had a burst water pipe. It was just water.
Oh.
It probably came from a well or something. But it's just.
It was city water.
It was a city
It's
water.
They are the higher
chlorinated water.
users, so.
I'm just saying, it's really hard. I guess if somebody said, hey, we have 1,000 waters and we can use up 1,000 waters and then we'll run out, then that would give us some number. We could say, okay, well, we can pick one thing that'll use 1,000 or 1,000 things that can use one. But it's really hard to say, well, we're only going to accept low water businesses, but not really sure what that is. But maybe we can accidentally get ourselves into the same amount of trouble just by accepting a whole lot of something that uses a little bit of water. Again, I'm not criticizing anything. I'm just saying it's really hard to make a decision one way or another without a number.
But we only have what the master water plan gave us.
So the policy 3.3, those listed there are what are listed in the economic opportunities analysis. So the potential growth industries listed there are what were listed in the opportunities analysis that's cited. So, if we want to, but again, even when we adopted the economic opportunities analysis, it was like, hey, this is a source, but if we have other sources we can point to, that show something different, then we can take that into account, but I don't know that that's the case here.
What would happen, Peggy, to your concern, if we had some language that just said simply, if any proposal is gonna use a significant amount of water, we'll evaluate that against our water plan? I mean, I know it's pretty vague, but that's all we have to go on really here is.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, we went into, ad nauseum 2 weeks ago about this, and poor Ruth is just sitting there with her hand up. It's whether or not we're going to listen to what our master water plan says. That's really what I'm basing it on. Are we going to ignore what the master water plan says? Or are we gonna say, well, that's what Echo Northwest says, so we have to stick with that?
What is it that you think the master water plan says that we're ignoring?
That's what's included in it.
Yeah.
That all their assumptions are based on low water users. I mean, that's why I thought it looks like it should be in there in 3.3, regardless of Echo Northwest not saying that it's in there.
It could even be that when a couple of engineers make a water master plan, they have to omit like acts of God, earthquakes that swallow all the streams and ginormous industries that use up all the water. And maybe that's all they meant by dry industries. I just don't know.
Councilor Hawsey.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that based on our current code, if we have enough water, based on our known water supply and their projected usage, I'm not sure we can exclude a developer. Is that true? I mean, that's what I've seen practiced.
Jim Brewer would say it depends.
On,
If you have a set amount of water available to you, then I think that the commission could have some discretion about whether we want 80% of that water to go to this one development, or we want to deny the application because we want that 80% of the water to go to multiple developments, right? So there may be some wiggle room there, but you would make your decision there, and I can't give you a signed letter on what the guarantee would be, but I could see outcomes both ways, I guess. If you had somebody come in and, yeah, we have enough water, but then we have no water for any other development, and we have a whole bunch of other developable land that now we can't develop because we don't have water for anybody else but you, because you're gonna take this much. I would believe that would be grounds enough for the planning commission or the city to deny an application for development.
Okay.
Yeah. We'd have to show it was creating restriction or hardship for the city and or future development capabilities. It may not be let me back up a little bit. It may not be a no, but it may be a not at this time kind of thing, right? Because we do have that opportunity. So maybe we don't have the current capacity to be able to provide that and still have sufficient surplus for future development to last us throughout our 20-year horizon. And so we need to expand our treatment plant, or we need to acquire additional water rights. We need to take some further action before we're going to feel comfortable getting up to 99.9% of our water being allocated for a development.
okay.
That felt really squishy.
No,
No,
I think
no,
that's
I
pretty
think that's
concrete.
right on.
I mean, what we have to do when we're doing those quasi judicial things is we have to point back to something specific. And the specific is you're gonna take such a large percentage of our remaining water supply that limits our ability to do all these other things. That's concrete, even though the decision is, that's why it's quasi judicial, not judicial, right?
Yeah, and they, if they appeal our decision to go to council,
Yeah.
the council probably would say the same thing we did. And so if they wanted to go to LUBA, I think LUBA would be hard pressed to overturn that.
Unless we were being egregious, if we had.
Well, right,
If
that
we had
wasn't
100
true
waters
or
left
something.
and somebody wanted half a water and we just didn't like it, that they were
We don't
taking
want-
that
Well,
half.
no, but I mean, but under the circumstances
Yeah.
But
he's
to
describing.
Peggy's point, should we have something in here that says that the city will take into consideration availability of water?
Yeah,
Or that
so,
they will take into
I
consideration
like that.
the master water plan.
Yes,
yeah, so we can leave in the beverage manufacturing and then just say, we'll take it into consideration, because maybe the beverage they're manufacturing is just taking little bits of water and, you
I was
know,
gonna say, if it's
They're
Coke,
producing-
that's easy. If it's beer, it's a lot more.
Taking it into consideration, that's within the code, right? I mean, the code language lists out the things to take into consideration, but
Maybe it's taking into consideration the city's water supply and other resources.
yeah, and I think I fully support
Yeah.
adding language like that into this. I mean, it's not telling us to do anything we're not gonna do otherwise, but we've pulled out some specific things that are flags, again. It's a
yeah,
flag to
and I
say.
think that would be a fair flag to have.
Sounds reasonable.
So, do we have a specific recommendation for some language? Are we talking about,
I like what Peggy said.
The low water users or the,
Oh.
take into consideration the master water plan.
Yeah, that part.
so
That's
just
what I-
append that at the end of 3.3, or what are you thinking?
Well, what I was thinking was that low water users should be in there, but it's in the water master plan. And so if we mention the water master plan, then it's basically the same thing.
But will people know what you're referring to?
Do you want to, do you have a way to, do you want to just state that somehow, like some words that you want to?
Wow.
Taking into account the,
I'm wondering,
It could be taking into account, it could be after the, on line 128, after the economic opportunities analysis, taking into account our master water plan.
Yeah.
Specifying low water users, taking into account. I mean, it's still gonna give leeway.
I guess if you mention the water master plan, I wonder why you don't mention the safe routes to schools plan or the traffic management plan, because
the sewer master plan.
they should all be taken into account.
Well, I think in this section, we have, non-polluting growth. But I think Peggy's point is that in addition to non-polluting, we also need to consider water usage. And like we said before, I think it's a reasonable flag. And if somebody really cared a lot about safe routes to schools, that would be a reasonable flag too,
then we might have that in the transportation.
So Peggy, you said that you want to add the words taking into account our master water plan to line 128?
After 128, and it could be either a comma after the EOA of 2021
Mhm.
as an additional. It doesn't have to be a completely different sentence because you're kind of talking about
Yeah,
the
I think
same
that- I think
thing.
that's where it goes.
Take into account the Philomath Master Water Plan.
Yeah.
Advising,
Well, even just that, even saying that.
Yeah.
Because
which advises low water users. I mean, the master, it's
I
how
see
many
what you're
pages? Yeah,
good point, yeah. I mean, I'm okay either way.
which advises low water users. Which just seems kind of weird because then the following line says, but we can still do food and beverage manufacturing, wood products, which we know is a high up water users.
Depends on what.
Could I throw something out there?
Absolutely.
out there? And, I mean, you mentioned transportation, it does seem odd to just call out one master plan to me. That after economic opportunities analysis 2021, within the direction of the city's master infrastructure plans. That addresses all of them. I mean, what if you have a high transportation user?
Yeah.
Your transportation system plan doesn't really support.
The economic side of it.
What if Amazon wants to build a 3.8 million square foot warehouse here? We don't have a transportation system plan for it.
Mhm.
It's within the constraints of our master infrastructure plans.
Well, my original intent was to actually make sure that it's actually in there about the water users instead of everything else like what you had just said.
Yeah, it is in there. If we,
Yeah, because it is in there, but it's also true, we're not calling out every other master plan that we have.
Right, we gotta make some decisions, right? We can't list everything all the time, but in this particular case, Peggy feels like it should be mentioned, and it is something the public has brought up an awful lot, so it seems like it'd be kind of giving a nod to the things that they've told us to mention it. Doesn't really hurt anybody.
no, but I'm saying that Ruth's suggestion would encompass that. It doesn't.
Yeah, but back to
It would
advertising, it
dilute,
dilutes.
yeah, cause like.
Dilutes Peggy's cause.
You know,
Alright.
It's not Peggy's cause, but
No.
I did bring it up, so
You're carrying the flag at the moment.
I am
Yeah,
carrying the
somebody's
flag at the
gotta do
moment,
that.
yeah.
I mean, you know, everything is a judgment call.
All right,
So I'll second that, Peggy.
Okay, thank you.
but can we still do the general thing that Ruth was saying and then add in an extra little poke for the water?
So
Because
I,
now I'm concerned that we're not taking into account
so I have,
the other
master
infrastructure
plans.
plans.
so I have economic opportunities analysis, 2021, comma, taking into account the water master plan and other city master plans.
Oh boy, that doesn't sound very good with the comma just that, because it kind of blurs it all into one thing. Also taking into account doesn't really sound that great either.
It sounds like what you're really saying is especially taking into account. And that's kind of the whole point of mentioning the water master plan, otherwise,
In particular, taking into account water usage.
yeah.
Well, and it could be like how it is at the
Infrastructure plans
beginning,
with special attention to water usage.
where we're talking about infrastructure, but there's an example of such as sewer infrastructure in the northern part of town. It kind of follows in that same line. It's an example. It's an example
Of an issue of,
of an issue that
Consider-
should,
point.
right,
be sure to be considered.
right.
My only concern is that if you specifically mention the water master plan, that's a huge document. What are you talking about?
It is.
Referring to?
That's why you almost have to, where it advises low water user,
Which advises.
which advises for,
I don't believe the water master plan advises low water users. It just says the assumptions are that we're gonna continue to have
Yeah.
low water users. It doesn't advise the continuation of low water users. I don't think that's an accurate statement.
okay, then I guess then it assumes we will be wooing low water users.
So
Yeah,
can
so
we taking into account the water master plan, which assumes low water users?
I'm confused with why why are we focused on mentioning the water master plan? I mean, isn't it the issue of water in general? I'm saying, can we get away from naming that specific plan, which most people reading this won't know what it is? I mean, you're right, that will then direct them for anyone who reads this and then is dying to read 400 pages about water usage elsewhere. If what we're trying to say is we really need to pay a lot of attention to economic development that might impact our water supply, right?
So with
Well-
that, could you go back to Philomath's economic base by focusing on non-polluting, low water using growth industries identified in there?
Yeah, I like that, actually.
yeah,
Oh, that's good.
That was easy. Geez, that's,
Yeah, you should have spoke up 5
Non-fluid.
minutes,
It
10
just
minutes
came
ago.
to me. This is a process. I could have thought of it 2 weeks ago. Everybody's good at that? Do we need
No,
to vote
I
on
like
that, or
that.
everybody's good at that?
I think everybody's happy with that.
So non-polluting, comma, low water users. Is that what you're saying?
Low water using, comma,
Okay.
growth industries identified in the.
Now, you mentioned the beverage, I had that marked. I don't really know what beverage manufacturing uses a lot of water. I've heard that before,
I
but I
like
do
the,
not know that.
no, and I've liked the way we've done because it was there from the water master plan stuff, so
Okay,
that concern goes away. We can leave it in there because I don't think Nectar Creek used all that much water, but I could be wrong.
No idea. But they made a really good product. I know that.
Not, no.
Did you like it?
It was good.
So we talked about splitting policy 3.3.
yes.
I've got the manufacture, so line 131, manufacturing, tourism, and services for visitors, comma, and residents, or visitors and residents,
Yeah.
period. And then a new policy 3.4, which will bump everything else down, which I'm not sure how to start, but it would include with, utilize tools such as, and then list out Commissioner Sullivan's specific language about incentives specific to, or specifically tied to tax creation,
Job creation.
enterprise zones, offsite development, list the rest of them out.
So somewhere at the beginning of that sentence, you would have job creation tax incentives.
Tax incentives tied to job creation, comma, enterprise zones, comma.
Okay.
Can you say that again? Like where exactly?
I'm not sure on the start, like utilize tools such as, or utilize tools such as incentives tied to job creation, comma, enterprise zones, comma, offsite development assistance, and then just list the rest of those out.
Well, maybe you just copy 3.3 and say promote job creation. Just promote through tax incentives. With tools such as tax incentives, enterprise zones.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, that'd work too.
So promote job creation
I like that.
with tools such as,
So this is a new paragraph,
a new policy 3.4.
Addressing what you talked about earlier.
right?
But really what I like about it, Commissioner Sullivan, it ties that all of these tools are then tied back to job creation, right? So it's
Yeah, that makes
promote
sense.
job creation.
Promote job creation, that's number
With
one.
incentives or tax incentives, comma, enterprise zones, yeah.
Yes, I don't have any problem with that. That makes sense. Would it be okay if we said exactly, since this is gonna go next to the public, if it doesn't end up kind of the way we were hoping, the next step is actually the public seeing it, so, would it be okay if you read out exactly what you're envisioning, and then maybe we can make a motion and officially just like set it down?
You
Just so
bet.
there's no surprises.
So new policy 3.4 to read, promote job creation with tax incentives, enterprise zones, offsite development assistance, discounts or deferrals of development fees, and other appropriate incentives.
You wanted the words, Joseph, about tying job creation?
Yeah, and since it starts with promote job creation and it specifically uses the word tax incentives, I think that covers everything I was considering. So
Yeah.
if you wouldn't mind repeating yourself just one more time, I want to write this down and then I'm going
Well,
to move
the
that.
easy way, Joseph, is that in line 131,
Mhm.
where it says with tools, right before the with tools, it would be promote job creation with tools.
Oh, I see what you're saying, and that would just
Such
crack off
as-
that last bit there. So
Yeah, and
promote
then
job
such as
creation with
tax-
tools such as, and then
tax
insert tax
incentives.
incentive,
And then the rest of the language.
enterprise zones, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to amend the main motion. Doing that. And I can state that out loud if it helps, but,
I'll second it.
okay.
All in favor? Unanimous. You know what, Haley? My apologies. I'm not always looking at you at the voting.
I am.
So if I ever say anything wrong about who's voted, did I get it right every time? Good.
Bruce
Thanks.
been watching, I've been watching.
Like our overlord.
Yeah. Silent. Silent overlord. Commissioner Huntsford.
On the new policy 3.5 about the grocery store or
Yeah.
market, I don't know why we say market, but maybe that's something different. Does this, I guess in my mind, I'd like to see a grocery store. Does it dilute at least what I want by saying some of this other stuff?
I was thinking the same thing, Van.
Yeah,
Wait, can you hear?
Yeah,
It's
the
like,
word
I mean,
or
the-
there does kind of say it would be just as good when we all know it wouldn't.
right. I mean, a specialty market would be really awesome, but sometimes you just need to go get some baking soda or.
Instead of a baked good, you just want to make your own baked
Right.
good, like cookies
I
that we
don't
didn't
know.
get tonight.
And maybe that's even foolish to feel that way, but I would think probably everybody in our town would want a grocery store here.
I shoot for a market of choice.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm just being facetious.
Well, maybe not, because that's more spendy, but
It is pretty spendy.
You know, and prepared foods, we have restaurants, so really it's a good
I mean,
all-around grocery
yeah.
store. I mean, how do you just call it a grocery store?
So just strike or market.
well, and then, I mean, it says here such as a specialty market that focuses on these things.
So strike or
Yeah,
market and also strike.
Well, it is kind of nice, some places you go to and they have like a little meat market and then there's, like a bread store and it is one way to do shopping. It's not done much in the US, but
Yeah.
it can be pretty nice.
But does that dilute, if you have, I'm not saying based on what we already have here, but if we'll take a deli, and then, down the street, let's do a little bakery here.
Mhm.
Does that dilute us ever getting a grocery store? I guess that's my question. I mean, that's.
I think
how
it dilutes the statement. I mean, because people want a grocery store and sure, a deli or prepared foods would be nice, but what they want is a grocery
Yeah.
store.
Yeah, I totally
So
agree.
there's the word or
If
doesn't
you want to
seem to be
split that
right
off
there.
into its own thing, support efforts to develop a grocery store, period, boom, new line.
Yeah.
No problem with that. I'm just thinking if you go to like any little village in France, there's the bread store, here's the candy store, here's the meat store. They're all next to each other and it's a lot of fun. And I wouldn't want to say no to that for a moment.
Yeah,
Is it strong enough if you just switch the word or to the word and?
I was gonna say, it's just, I think the problem is where it says such as, because that
I agree.
dictates the type of store that we're talking about. If we want a grocery store,
We want.
comma,
Yeah,
market, or specialty market,
Yeah, because if it just
whatever,
said,
any of it. We just need some damn food.
Yeah.
We just need some places to get some food.
if that comma
Well,
became a period and the rest of the line
That's
went
not-
Some
away.
fresh food.
Yeah,
What?
I have a period after needs.
I mean,
I-
I'd be happy to have just a produce
Yes,
market.
if it said period after needs and the rest of that line went away.
That's what I did, take
And give it more
period after
punch.
needs
Think
and
about
scratch
that,
the
yeah.
rest.
So it would read, support efforts to develop a grocery store or market to provide for community needs, period, end.
I like that.
I'm
You might even say
good, Van, or
full
you don't like
service
Yeah,
grocery store.
I'm good with that, because when you were talking about, like you mentioned, France, I mean, okay, I could see having some of those things after we have a grocery store.
Sure.
Yeah, then maybe the specialty deli comes in later.
There you
Yeah,
go.
yeah.
So is there a consensus to put a period after the word needs and strike the rest?
I like it.
That's fine, but I would point out that I think our odds of getting someone who's gonna open up a deli in this town are a lot greater than our odds of getting a supermarket.
Do we want to support that?
Again,
That's the
I want
policy.
something to eat and I want it now. I just, I don't know.
I see your point too. I
Yeah.
can't.
I mean, the
really
grocery
argue.
store is an evergreen issue in this town, and my understanding is that until you hit 10,000 people, you're just not gonna get one. And I would be really happy with any small market that sells any type of anything.
We used to have a grocery store here,
A grocery store would be great.
you know, I mean, so
would
the
a deli,
10,000, it
so would
isn't really,
whatever, a bakery, so would.
we used to have
produce
D&D.
I remember D&D.
IGA.
So can I
Yeah.
suggest, I've heard put a period after needs. What, as an alternative to that, what if we just had support efforts to develop a grocery store or market to provide for community needs such as fresh produce, deli, baked goods, and prepared foods?
Yeah.
You get rid of the word focuses.
Get rid of
That's
a
just-
specialty market that
That
focuses
doesn't say
on.
where all those things are gonna come from, it can be anywhere.
Okay, I'm
I like that.
okay with that.
I think it helps define what we mean by grocery store. Not that we don't know that, but it's like we want a grocery store
Yeah.
that has, or market,
Yeah.
that has fresh produce, deli, baked goods, prepared foods. That's what we mean when
Exactly,
we say
because a
grocery
lot of
store.
folks, I think, consider the Dollar General to be a grocery store.
No.
It is.
Well, they do,
It
They
is.
do have
whether or not
That
we
is
do.
where people,
but there are some
Buy
that
a
do.
lot
I like
of
the way
the
you said
food,
that and the
so-
fact that we're keeping the word market in there, because for example, we've got our little baby farmer's market or whatever, and when, you know, we have to make decisions or policies around if we're gonna promote that or not, we can say, well, our master plans, you know, our comprehensive plan says we're gonna support markets that provide fresh food. So yeah, we're gonna change this, do whatever we need to do.
I'd also like to point out, because even I forget about them, but Gathering Together is like right over there. And they
Yeah.
have nothing but beautiful produce
Mhm.
and bakery stuff and all this stuff.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
I used to work there and I forget about them.
Mhm.
I know, and it's so close.
I know, they're
Mhm.
right
I
here.
We
know.
need them to come to the farmer's market and that to move to 13th Street with this little brick walks, and then we're gonna start having something.
Is there
Would expand
consensus
city
on-
limits,
Is there consensus of 3.5 as?
as you said.
That's what I heard, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And 3.6 would just be a number change. 3.5 to 3.6. Go 4, look okay to everybody?
I still am back on 130, on policy 3, what, the old 3.5?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that we should strike, supporting improvements at Skirvin Park. Because it is very specific. It was an action item, but if we're gonna highlight Skirvin Park, home of the frolic, we should be specific about some of the other areas, like the museum property that's even in our old comprehensive plan, or the Marys River. We used to have activities there. We've had music at Marys River Park at some years. So either we add more instead of just highlighting the frolic. I mean, I know their association with the frolic and everything, but it just seems either we take it out or we add some of the other options that the city has.
What if we replace that specific thing with supporting improvements at private and public venues?
Well,
Could
you're
be.
talking about supporting growth of tourism in Philomath. That's why Skirvin Park and Frolic and Rodeo is in here. It's not because of my relationship to them, it's because the relationship that the Skirvin Park and the Frolic and Rodeo have with the city of Philomath
Yeah.
as a tourist destination.
Sure,
Probably.
but we could promote other areas for tourist destinations. I mean, this is all about supporting growth of tourism, right? And this was an example given. So if we use that as an example given, then it seems like it's only accurate to use some of the other areas that we potentially have focused in the past, such as the the grounds of the museum. They do have events there. Instead of either we limit it to kind of like what Gary just said, or we add more than just the one venue.
I'm okay. The only other one I can think of is the museum, but I would be fine with adding that in. It's,
I mean,
I don't know what others are there, I
in
guess, if
terms
there
of
are.
driving tourism, I mean, I think the rodeo is undeniably the
It's
biggest
the
game
sure,
in
it's the
town.
biggest
I
one,
mean, that's why it warrants
but it
Yeah,
isn't really the
entry.
only one. You know, so to me, it just calling out the biggest one that we have, just doesn't seem right. You know, when we have other events that we could try and promote at Mary's River or at I know we have some stuff going on at the city park, but it just seems like if you're gonna have one thing, you might as well have a few of the other options that the city has. Either
At Skirvin Park and other public venues.
or like what Gary said.
And other private and public venues, because, Scout Lodge or, whatever.
Exactly, Scout Lodge.
Could we just like vote on some of these things, because we're approaching hour number 3.
Oh, we don't want, okay.
I mean, I don't care one way or the other, but if we could just, if we could vote or something so we can move on.
I think the most important thing is at home and the frolic and rodeo should be in parentheses, not in comments.
Like supporting improvements at Skirvin Park or the museum. Because now we're talking about supporting improvements at the parks instead. We're not just promoting, and it's almost like two issues going on there.
Well, is it now called the Benton County Museum? Or it's the Benton County Museum
Historical
Annex?
Museum.
Annex, I think they call it now, where they opened the other one. I mean, I am fine with leaving that, what's there, and saying, adding the Benton County Historical Museum or something like that.
As an IE or as an example, this is what Corvallis or Philomath has.
So you want to put EG between at and Skirvin Park?
Yeah, maybe striking supporting improvements. Developing plazas or other attractions, i.e. Skirvin Park, museum, Philomath Historical Museum.
Well, I mean, we need some improvements at the museum too.
Well, Skirvin Park is unique in that it's owned by the city, so the city can actually support improvements at the city-owned Skirvin Park.
True.
Home of Frolic Rodeo, we can support improvements of the museum, but we don't own the museum.
But we
And
own
don't
the city
the
park
Scout
and we
Lodge, don't
own,
others. Yeah, we're talking about tourist attractions. I mean, we could do promoting events at the museum and other, public and private venues and nearby recreation opportunities if we want to get at other venues where you can have events.
I'm okay with that.
so it would be supporting improvements at Skirvin Park, we could support improvements at the museum. We could also support improvements at City Park or Mary's River Park. All I'm trying to do is make it so we're not just saying in our document one thing, one very, very specific thing, and not having the others being shouted out also.
But
is all I'm doing.
This section is about tourism, and I think what I'm hearing is the point's being made that Skirvin Park is the only one that really has a relation to tourism.
But is
In
it
a
the only one that
significant-
can have a relationship to tourism? I mean, if you promote something, you're probably gonna have people show up, right? If it's promoted, but if it's not promoted, I don't know, I guess I'm the only one seeing it, that just
Well-
seems odd.
Well, it says developing plazas and other attractions, so there are statements here about other things.
I mean, as Chris suggested, supporting improvements in Skirvin Park, home of the Philomath Frolic and Rodeo, and promoting events at Benton County Historical Museum and nearby recreational opportunities. I guess you could say music in the park is no, I can't even say it's a tourism thing.
No, it's a real local thing, yeah.
So there isn't anything. So if we're promoting events and where they're at, it doesn't really matter. I think that covers those things that don't already exist.
So I think to move on, we need a motion or not.
Okay. I move that we add language after supporting improvements at Skirvin Park, comma, the city park, or i.e. supporting improvements at example, Skirvin Park, City Park, Historical Museum, and nearby recreational opportunities. So it would be developing plazas and other attractions, supporting improvements at Skirvin Park, City Park, the Historical Museum. I mean, it all has to go through the city anyway to get approval. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but
So it'd be developing plazas or other attractions, comma, i.e. supporting improvements at Skirvin Park, City Park, Historical Museum, etc.
Second the motion.
And promoting events and, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, so all in favor?
we need to have Philomath Frolic and Rodeo in there.
Well,
If you put it in there, I'll put it back in, or I'll try and put it back in at our
Well,
next meeting.
how about that? You can even make a motion here as soon as this one passes or fails.
It's okay, if they passed
So-
it.
Well, that could go in.
We didn't have
parentheses.
discussion, but that was my discussion.
Okay,
I don't know if I'm a little lost on the motion. I don't know if Rita captured it better than I
I
did,
have
but
the motion, to add the language after other, developing plazas and other attractions, add, i.e. supporting improvements at Skirvin Park, City Park, and the Historical Museum, and promoting events and nearby recreational opportunities.
Can
Is
we
that what you
just
said?
put home of the Philomath Frolic and Rodeo in parentheses after Skirvin Park?
so you think people don't know that that's Skirvin Park?
I
Is
don't
that
know.
it?
Well, no, it's our biggest tourist
It's our biggest
attraction.
Right, I
Yeah.
realize that, so, but are you thinking that people don't know that's what Skirvin Park is?
Oh, no,
I'm sure
they
they
don't
don't.
know.
I'm sure they
I'm
don't
sure
know.
they
Oh.
don't know, what Skirvin Park is.
They know the rodeo grounds. They don't know that it's.
Yeah,
The name of the park?
right.
Yeah, I agree, just like what Van just said, keep, in parentheses, home of Philomath Frolic and Rodeo.
Are we committing ourselves to supporting improvements at the county museum?
No,
Well, doesn't mean we're gonna pay for it, right? It just means if someone has an initiative to improve the museum, we're not gonna be against it. I don't know anybody that would be.
supporting isn't necessarily money.
Doesn't mean dollars.
Yeah, we're supporting, this is all about supporting growth of tourism.
Moral
Yeah.
support.
Moral support. Yeah.
so I'm gonna, as Van said, we do have another shot at this, so I'm gonna try to move along. So I'll pretend I didn't ask for the vote the first time.
Oh.
Do we have a clear motion? But we already moved and seconded, so, and it did not include. So
Home, in parentheses, home of the, that's home of the Philomath Frolic.
how formal do we have to be about this? To be super formal about this, we have to finish the vote on the motion that was made. And you can vote no on your own motion if you want to.
Can I
And we
withdraw
can-
that motion for,
You can withdraw the motion.
Sure, we can be that informal, yes.
okay.
Works for
Then
me.
I withdraw that motion.
Whoever seconded it needs to
Be okay
agree
with
with that.
Sounds good.
And then the new motion will be read by our city recorder.
Wow. You've got the power now, Ruth.
Pressure mount, just a minute. I've got to do something about this through the motion. Okay.
Really threw her for a loop there.
Okay. So the policy would read, support growth of tourism in Philomath and encourage pass-through travelers to stop in Philomath by encouraging a strong downtown retail environment, developing plazas or other attractions, supporting improvements at Skirvin Park, home of Philomath Frolic and Rodeo, City Park, and the Benton County Historical Museum, and promoting events and nearby recreational opportunities.
I originally had an et cetera in there just to show, the City Park, Historical Museum, et cetera, showing that it's not making it all specific, but without the et cetera would be fine.
After Historical Museum?
Yeah.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor of that new motion, raise your hand. Aye?
Aye.
Okay, that one is unanimous. Back to 4. Workforce development. Any comments?
No,
Yeah,
you do?
Dang it, Dan. Come on.
Dang it.
well, on the such as, I guess, in my mind, you start at the top and go down.
What are you talking about?
Line
Well,
149.
starting on page 150.
Oh,
It said, on 49, it says such as Philomath School District.
okay.
They probably wouldn't be the first one that I would think of for workforce development, but, I mean, somebody could argue differently to me. I mean, I think Workforce Oregon, Community Services Consortium, and places like that would be more ones that I'd look to.
Yeah.
I don't know, and no, it doesn't make any difference because you list them all, but typically you list them kind of from the top to the bottom, and that's all.
Because it's them spatially, kind of working
Yeah.
my way further away from the core of it. Yeah.
Oh, well, and, yeah, I'm, like I say, it's
Well-
just a comment, I'm not even gonna make a motion.
What is developing a workforce? That training?
Yeah,
No, then
Yeah.
Philomath High School
yeah.
does that, right?
I'm fine, it's just a comment. Okay.
Okay, I believe that closes our discussion of the comprehensive plan.
We need
We need a
vote
motion.
on the amended motion.
Yes.
I move to schedule a public hearing.
Nope, the motion's already been made.
Oh.
Now it's been amended, so we just
Oh.
need to call for a vote on it.
I thought you.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So,
So did
Joseph made a motion.
did
At the very
Commissioner
first.
Sullivan include the scheduling of the public hearing date and time in his original motion?
I do not believe so.
I said that we set up a public meeting. I don't think I used the word schedule, but the implication was intended to be there.
Your implication was to say a motion that said to schedule a public hearing on the economy chapter update of the Philomath Comprehensive Plan for June 7th, 2022 at 6:00 PM. Is that what I was reading?
You're adding that?
Wow.
Say
Make it
yes.
too,
I think the
So why don't
motion-
I amend my motion to that.
Yes.
Honestly, I looked, I couldn't find it. Can someone point it out to me where it is?
I think the motion as stated is fine, Commissioner
Okay.
Sullivan, and we can
As stated then.
set the
The
date.
title, topic amendments and comprehensive,
Oh,
the very first thing, wasn't it? I think. On the
So in
back.
non-formal language, we're voting to accept everything we just discussed and set the public hearing for June 7th.
No.
Yes.
Can we just make those two? So we could at least talk about the schedule before we approve the 3 hours that we just made the decisions about what's gonna be in there, and
Well-
then talk about the schedule?
well, if you don't like June 7th, we haven't voted it yet. You could, make a motion to move the date to some other thing.
Or at least
discuss it.
entertain a discussion about having 2 of them in June.
Now's the time.
Well,
The current motion is just to approve it and to schedule a hearing in the future.
Yes,
Okay.
that was the
Let's
motion.
do that, let's
I
do
like
that.
That
this.
was the
All right.
motion we made, yeah.
Cool, we can
That's-
close this chapter and then. open the
Okay.
vote again.
so all in favor of, oh, you're ready to vote. Okay, all in favor of voting yes on that motion, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Unanimous, thank you. So now, I'd like to entertain a discussion about our schedule. Even though I believe it's a little bit out of order, that's okay.
No, next meeting. Oh, no, that's not, yeah, never mind. Go ahead.
The housing chapter is already out there. We're gonna do it on that day.
Yeah.
So I would like to have us discuss, do we really wanna continue to have 2 meetings in June, or can we move the public hearing to June 20th? And go to 1 meeting instead of, include June. The body of the background of this page, that the revised meeting schedule says it will meet twice a month through June. I propose making it, we'll meet twice a month through May. And then go to 1 a month, and that would put the public hearing on June 20th. Only because we
I see what you're
usually
saying.
would meet on the 3rd week of the month, right? 3rd week of the month. But it would put us down to 1 a month instead of 2 in June.
Sounds good to me.
So the other topic on June 7th is the FEMA audit for a floodplain code review. We had our representative from our FEMA region fly down from Seattle and did an audit of our policies, our code language surrounding floodplain management. And he's got a number of recommended changes that we need to make. And so that does need to come, and that'll have some discussion with it. I'm concerned about piling that on top of the backside of a public hearing and discussion and deliberation and a decision, and then turning the page and then having a full discussion about the changes there. So that's why I kept the 2 meetings in June. Because that's gonna take a little bit of time. So it may just be a little bit longer meeting if we.
I don't think none of us want that.
But
Public hearing's probably already gonna be kind of long. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe nobody shows up. Would it be possible to do the FEMA audit and the floodplain code review on the 20th, and then move everything else, make the public hearing actually not until July? Just to keep us down to meeting one day in through the summer, which to me, the summer includes June.
Well, do we want to stipulate exactly what things we want to hear on what day, or could we just leave this as, hey, please, Chris, give us 1 meeting a month and let him figure it out? 'Cause I don't really care what we hear on what days. Specifically, I just want to go to 1 a month.
Yeah, that's a good point. What about you, Jonna?
I'm a broken man, whatever, that's fine. Yeah, I would prefer 1 meeting a month. I don't care what order we do anything. But if the rest of the commission would prefer to stay in 2 meetings a month, I'll suck it up.
No, I think,
I would prefer 1 meeting a month, but I knew when I signed up that it was clear that there would be 2 meetings a month until the comp plan was done. So I can't, say. Oh, no, I can't do it.
We can cancel the June 7th or not do the June 7th meeting and just bump all that to the 20th. And then that July 18th, we'll just take the initial discussion review, we'll just bump everything down. So we'll just cancel the 7th and move everything down one. It's fine.
If we were doing one a month, it would be a little bit easier to double up on public hearings or something where appropriate, just because the meetings inevitably take as long as all of us can sit still in the chair. It doesn't really matter what we're talking about, but that's literally what the limit is. It's not how much we're talking about, it's how long we can sit still in the chair. So that means the public meeting will take 4 hours. So why not get 2 of them in as ones? You know, now let's get more bang for our buck.
Yeah, well, other than just the timing of it, I mean, we won't be ready for our public hearing on urbanization until October. So it doesn't really make sense to hold off on the, if we're doing the economy stuff now, you'd be talking about moving, not doing the hearing on it until October in order to do it with another one, which seems kind of far off.
Mm.
But I think we'll be okay. That's fine. Is everybody good with just just getting rid of that June 7th and we'll just move everything down one meeting date?
I'm okay either way.
All right, so we'll do. Take June 7th off. It's the evening.
Haley? Gary? Go ahead.
She's got her thumb up.
I'm clearly outvoted. So Ruth, is there anything that we need to do specifically, or just by consensus now we're on the 20th for the public hearing? Okay.
Oh, we don't need to do a motion?
No.
Okay.
So our next meeting is May 16th,
Yes.
which, back to that schedule, is the public hearing for the housing, and then a downtown area-wide plan review. Is that going to be a discussion or just a presentation, or is there any action for us on that?
There will be not action, but the area-wide plan, we hired a consultant to come in and look at the area. There are several members of the public and the city council that were involved. I think a few of you were involved, and I've got the final draft back out. It's 80+ pages or something, and so it's one I'll try to get to you. I can get it to you tomorrow. Well, I think it's still draft, so I can get that out to you to start reading ahead of time, but we need to start having conversations about some of the recommendations in there and which of those, if any, we want to tie into code changes. There's some specific code change language and some other things, so.
Is there a reason, so we're reviewing it before it becomes final?
It
Or
will be final before you see it.
So the question I have is that the right timing to look at it, other than it's fresh?
Yeah, if it's already final.
I mean, we definitely want to look at it before we start, changing the zoning map and doing code, but does it inform any of our upcoming urbanization chapter or design standards or any of those things we're going to talk about?
It was going to influence I think what dropped in there, it was going to influence some of the code revision stuff, which is now filtered out and is now October, November, and well, maybe December, January, February.
Standards.
Because we pulled some of that. Pat had originally wanted to do some code revision stuff in July and August and September, but that all got filtered through or filtered out. So no, other than it being fresh, and I think the sooner you get it, then the more time you have to review it, but.
Yeah, I'm happy with getting it. I'm just thinking about, we're not just looking at how many meetings, but we're also looking at.
I guess
how
I'm
long they
partially
are,
banking
what
on
we're
that
trying to
housing. I feel like we
accomplish.
had a good discussion on that. I think that housing
Well, let's leave it there and then
chapter
it's-
will go fairly short. So it's really a presentation on, here it is.
Okay.
Take a look at it. Here's the highlights. And then we just won't revisit it for some time.
Okay, thank you. Staff update. Got it. Any questions?
Thank you for that too. I always like the staff updates.
Yeah.
I do have a question on Letman. They're not building a road access to the highway, are they? That was approved?
Yep, it's a temporary access
Temporarily.
until the access to the west is fully developed, or to the east is fully developed.
But it remains a fire lane, is that correct, or no?
I wasn't involved.
That was a
That's okay.
condition. It's a right in, right out only.
Oh, okay.
The whole idea from that other
Storage
list.
depot
have
names
fewer
their streets
access.
inspirational
I
way.
was just thinking the same thing.
Yeah, it's
You
like,
gotta
wow.
dream big.
Talk about a rub our little nose in it.
Okay, I think that's all. Meeting adjourned.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. Mic is still hot.
The live stream is still on until Chris gets up there.